She was a very popular student.
She'd more or less completed that morning her final A-level exam.
She had just vanished.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? You know, it just doesn't happen.
I remember being woken up by the police helicopters.
The police helicopter picked up a person running away.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
This was every young parent's nightmare. The anguish of where is she, what's happened to her.
Police!
On the outskirts of Wigan lies the quiet and peaceful village of Orrell.
Orrell is a really nice place to live. It's pretty quiet. We've got everything we need on our doorstep.
We have loads of local shops. We have butchers, newsagents, coffee shops, craft shops. So we are very lucky around here. It's a lovely place to live.
I'd say it's one of the more affluent parts of Wigan. There's kind of a lot of wine bars and coffee shops. It's the type of place that's quite a close-knit community. There's a lot of families that have been in Orrell for a long time.
I grew up round here and it's always been, you know what I mean, a quiet place. It's a lot of older people and you've got the style of people what still, so recently, still tip the cap. You know what I mean? It's like an old-fashioned area. Everybody knows everybody.
Most people have lived here all their lives because really there's no reason to move away.
The parkland on the edge of the village has long been a draw for locals.
Orrell Water Park's a little local recreation spot.
Come on, doggy.
You get a lot of dog walkers coming here. A lot of people come just to kind of stretch the legs, walk the dog and get a little bit of fresh air.
I come here every day. A lot of dog walkers, families. Just a nice place to go for a change of scenery.
I mean, I've got 2 young kids. We take the kids around the park. A lot of people go fishing there.
There's always students around here in the lunchtime or the breaks. If the weather's nice, they come and sit on the benches. You follow the path up there. It can take you up to Winstanley College across the fields.
With its outstanding reputation, Winstanley College attracts students from across the northwest.
Winstanley College is one of the top-rated sixth form colleges in the entire country. It draws ambitious, clever young people from across Greater Manchester, also parts of Lancashire and Merseyside.
It's always top standard. I mean, when I was growing up, everybody wanted to get into Winstanley.
It tends to get a lot of the kind of high achievers and people who do well in the GCSEs will go to Winstanley because they want to get the good grades to go to good universities as well.
And in 2017, 18-year-old Ellen Higginbottom was in her second year at Winstanley College.
Ellen Higginbottom was a very popular student. She came from the edge of Manchester and she was studying for her A-levels. She was an only child to Michael and Kay Higginbottom. She was a talented musician. She enjoyed listening to and performing music, and she also had a notable love of equestrian and horses.
Being a teenager at the start of adulthood, Ellen had a large social network around her.
She had a big group of friends and was extremely popular with everybody at the college. She also had a very devoted boyfriend. They were clearly in a very close relationship.
But life for the young couple was about to change.
It was a very pleasant summer's afternoon. Ellen had more or less completed that morning, I think, her final A-level exam. So you can imagine the sort of mood that she and her friends were in, a celebratory mood.
Ellen had gone into Winstanley College earlier on in the day, and because of Ellen's age, she was clearly independent. So when her particular exam was done, she went out for a walk, which the students often did. She left the college, walked over the field at the back, and entered into Orrell Water Park. It's a pleasant place to go for an afternoon stroll. Perfectly normal thing to do. You know, she just went about her business. Nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Ellen had told her friends she was going for a walk at the water park, then would meet up with them after their exams. But she failed to return to college at the arranged time.
With her friends, she was apparently renowned at getting lost.
She sent a joking Snapchat message to her friends saying that she'd been here about 15, 20 minutes and was already lost.
But as the hours pass and Ellen fails to meet her friends or return home, concern grows.
It was becoming clear in the afternoon. She'd not made contact with any friends or family. She'd never been missing before, so it was unusual.
Had Ellen wanted some time alone? Had she got lost? Or had she met up with someone to celebrate after her exams? With her disappearance so out of character, her boyfriend organises a search for Ellen across the area.
A number of close friends and relatives travelled up to Orrell and actually went up to the streets asking people if they had seen her.
Her family conducted their own inquiries and search as you would. They'd be thinking things like, has she fallen and got hurt or something of that nature.
News of Ellen's disappearance quickly spreads amongst the local community.
Word gets around very quickly, and there were scores of messages being posted on social media asking people to look for Ellen.
Facebook and Twitter was going off quite a lot. I mean, I'm only a couple of years older than she would be, so there was a lot of people who I knew that actually did kind of know her as well. And I can remember when she was missing, everyone being in fear.
Young people going missing. It's something that does cause a great deal of concern in the communities. It tends to trigger a bigger response because they tend to be more vulnerable.
But as the afternoon turns into evening, there's still no sign of Ellen.
By the evening, Ellen's friends and residents in the Orrell area were extremely concerned. It really struck a chord that a young woman of her age had just vanished.
When it became clear that they couldn't locate her, that's when police were contacted, which was around about 7:20 in the evening.
Her dad rang the police saying that his daughter hadn't come home from college, hadn't come back at the expected time, and it was extremely out of character.
Police take over the search for Ellen, and Detective Superintendent Howard Millington is made the senior investigating officer.
There are set what we call golden hour tasks to do. You know, has the person been injured and taken to hospital? So you check with local hospitals, check with family and friends, it's that kind of thing.
Ellen's phone is turned off, but police speak with her friends and discover that they all received the same message from her earlier in the day.
What we found, it was a Snapchat-type message sent by Ellen, which geolocated to Orrell Water Park. So we knew at a particular point in the afternoon where she was.
With Ellen last known to be in Orrell Water Park just before 2 p.m, police start an intensive search of the area.
You cannot expect what had happened to her had actually happened.
In the peaceful village of Orrell, concern is rising for the welfare of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom after she seems to have vanished into thin air.
It would appear from messages retrieved from her friends' phones that she'd arranged to meet up with some of her friends in a post-exam, you know, letting hair down type of afternoon.
The college student had gone for a walk after finishing her final exam and was due to meet up with friends to celebrate. But she never turned up, and her phone is switched off. Local reporter Andrew Knoll finds himself at the centre of a developing story.
We do report on missing people fairly regularly. It's something that people are very keen to share and engage with. On the Friday evening, I remember a lot of people messaging on those, expressing concern about what was happening with Ellen, asking me for information, asking me what I'd heard about it, what the police had said about it.
As the night draws in, there is still no sign of Ellen. Her worried family desperately cling on for hope.
This was every young parent's nightmare, the anguish of where is she, what's happened to her. You think that your child has, worked hard, got through the exam period, fully entitled to go off and let their hair down on a summer's afternoon. And, the anxiety of sitting exams that all parents and all students feel is as nothing compared to what poor Ellen's parents will then have gone through.
Ellen had been at Orrell Water Park at 2 p.m. So police focused their attention on the surrounding area. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington oversaw the investigation.
So clearly the inquiries did focus on searching the area around Orrell Water Park. Although you've got to focus on where you think that person may be. It's important as a detective to keep an open mind so we don't get what we call confirmation bias creeping in and start to focus on the wrong things.
As night falls, police swarm the village and parklands in a desperate attempt to find Ellen.
On that Friday night, a huge operation swung into action to try and find Ellen.
I remember there was quite a police presence in the area.
There was police everywhere, so everyone knew there was something going on, but obviously didn't know exactly what it was.
After midnight, the police are left with no option but to take to the skies to search the surrounding fields and parkland.
I remember when being woken up by the police helicopters in the early hours of the morning.
It's got thermal imaging and very high quality resolution cameras to search for people who may be missing and at high risk.
As the helicopter scans the ground below, suddenly something shows up.
The helicopter discovered a heat source. It was in a farmer's field adjacent to Orrell Water Park and some woodland.
The police helicopter, it picked up a heat source of a person that was running away.
Could this be Ellen? Had she become lost or hurt herself? The helicopter crew direct the officers towards the heat source.
The officers came down this path and closed in. At that particular time, there was some kind of standing crop in the field, probably around about 18 inches high.
The search team move into the crop field, and they quickly make a shocking find.
Tragically, the body of Ellen was discovered.
Police seal off the scene, and it's established that the laptop and mobile phone Ellen had with her were missing. Next to her, an abandoned spade is found.
I got the call from the night detective around about 2:45 in the morning. From the way it was described to me, I was immediately concerned that it was a case of homicide.
On the Saturday morning, Greater Manchester Police had launched a murder probe. And the immediate, urgent appeal for information was to be put out there through the press.
Greater Manchester Police are appealing for information after the body of missing student Ellen Higginbottom was found in Orrell Water Park in the early hours of the morning.
It was a huge shock for everyone around here because it's just such a quiet place, and there aren't normally bad people about.
It's not something you expect in your village, is it? It just doesn't happen until you wake up one morning and some poor girl's lost her life.
I mean, I've got kids myself, I've got a little girl myself, And I really was, I mean, all the family was, everybody around here was shocked.
It was very scary. You know, I've got grandchildren, and you think that that young girl, what she went through, you know, what she had to deal with in that situation must have been horrendous.
It's quite scary for everyone. You know, there's a lot of people walking dogs around here and just using Oral Water Park, so the fact it was done in broad daylight in such a severe manner, I think, was what kind of shocked people a lot.
Since the early hours, Detective Superintendent Howard Millington has been at the scene.
Well, clearly, the main community concern is there a potential for another offence? You know, this is a horrific crime. You know, nobody's been yet arrested. What are the police doing about it? Around about 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd actually deployed to the scene. My priority then was making sure that all the evidence that we could preserve at that time had been, and facilitate detailed searches with a view to apprehending the offender as quickly as possible.
With the crime scene secured and forensics searching for anything that could catch the killer, this popular beauty spot is suddenly put under the microscope.
I came down to Oral Water Park the morning after Ellen Higginbottom's body had been discovered. It was here the police had a line of tape and an officer was standing there. There was no public access beyond this point. I remember the park actually being fairly quiet for a Saturday morning in the middle of summer. Word had obviously got out.
When I came out with the dog in the morning, I saw the police forensics, all the white gear.
There was a sense of alarm and numbness, I think, in the area.
The murder investigation is ramped up, and police launch an appeal to the public.
There wasn't an immediately obvious suspect, and so my media strategy was tailored around that. It was to include an appeal for information, to try and identify any as yet unknown witnesses or intelligence, to generate those kind of lines of inquiry.
Police need to establish who could have possibly wanted to cause harm to Ellen and why. With her phone and laptop missing, could this have been a robbery gone wrong? Or was it somebody closer to home?
I had several working hypotheses. Is this somebody in dispute with Ellen? You know, who'd she been in contact with? Was there anything we didn't know about Ellen that we needed to know? Anybody in conflict with her? Looking at computers belonging to Ellen, her phone, were there any communications with people we didn't know about? Well, the reality is, stranger attacks are extremely rare. The sad fact is that most people who are victims of homicide are actually killed by somebody who's known to them.
Suddenly, Ellen's friends and family are put under scrutiny.
The majority of murder victims are known to their killers.
The body of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom has been found 10 hours after she went missing in the Lancashire village of Orrell. Greater Manchester Police start to look closely into Ellen's life.
In the wake of her body being found, immediately one of the questions is, did she know her killer? In the vast majority of cases, that is the case.
The questions I would be looking for is there anybody who she's been in dispute with or fallen out with? Now, that can be because they're friends or work colleagues or partners, family, anything of that nature. You know, does she have a partner? It transpired she had a boyfriend who'd assisted with the search.
Could any of these individuals be involved? With a list of people drawn up by police, everyone closely connected to Ellen is intensively questioned.
As a senior investigating officer, you know, keeping an open mind and making sure that every angle is covered is important. So we utilise a strategy called trace, investigate and evaluate, where we look for things like alibis and where people were. And some of these people I was able to rule out as being potentially responsible because their alibi and movements and times showed that they couldn't be involved.
Ellen's family, boyfriend and inner circle are ruled out of the investigation completely, which leaves a terrifying prospect.
The reality was that this was a stranger who'd committed this horrific crime.
With a killer on the loose, the concern in the community grows.
I think people were in fear here that there's someone kind of walking among us in Orrell that could do something like that.
It affected the community pretty badly because there was lots of lone women that used to walk around the park with either the dogs, prams, stuff like that wouldn't go. They wouldn't actually go near the place.
The pressure is mounting on police to find those responsible.
When it became apparent that this was a stranger, in all likelihood, you know, the responsibility on my shoulders as the SIO, it's so intense. You know, I was in the white heat of the investigation. You know, Great Manchester Police were resourcing and investigating this as thoroughly as possible to apprehend the very, very dangerous offender.
Post-mortem results arrive, which could offer clues to her attacker.
The cause of Ellen's death was two quite dreadful, very deep wounds, in particular to her neck, either one of which would have been sufficient to kill her.
DS Howard Millington said the severity of it and the ordeal that Ellen had gone through was unimaginable. It was a crime of very unusual severity and brutality.
Forensics also arrive from the scene, and the investigation takes an even more sinister turn.
But this was where Ellen was actually found. A little bit further this way, and there was a hole in the hedge. And we proved forensically, once the scientists had been down, that's where the attack took place, because of some of the blood samples and other material there. And it was clear she was dragged through into the field after the attack.
Ellen's clothing had been disturbed in a way that was consistent with deliberate interference with her garments.
Also, she had what looked like faint ligature mark around her wrist. And there was a belt, which was around her feet, ankle area, which we confirmed with Ellen's family didn't belong to Ellen. It was clearly a gent's belt.
The discovery leads police to consider a new theory.
So somewhere in this particular area, in these trees, and that's where the attack took place. And my belief was that this was ultimately a sexually motivated crime.
A speck of blood is picked up on the belt found at the scene, and it's sent off for DNA testing. The marks around Ellen's ankles also appear to suggest the belt was used to drag her from the attack site to the field where her body was found.
They were, in my view, looking to dispose of the body. There was a spade found nearby. So I think their intentions was to make sure she was buried and not found.
Confronted with the latest evidence, police appeal to the community for information, giving out details of Ellen's missing items. The plan works, and they are contacted by a concerned local.
A call was received in relation to a man acting strangely in certain circumstances. Ultimately, that led us to a piece of woodland not far away where there was a fire. And within the fire, the officers discovered a laptop that had been burnt. Now, we did know from the liaison with Ellen's family that she had a Lenovo laptop.
When the police went to the embers of the dying fire, they indeed found some of Ellen's possessions, her laptop and her keys, in what police quickly surmised was a not very effective attempt to destroy some evidence and cover traces that they'd been in possession of them.
Following the discovery of Ellen's missing belongings, burnt out in woodland in nearby Billinge, the police make a breakthrough.
An arrest was made. The man was in custody, being questioned on suspicion of murder.
The man in question is a 47-year-old from the Billinge area. Witnesses identified him trying to set fire to items in the woods. Could this be Ellen's killer? He's taken in and questioned by police and makes a startling admission.
When he was spoken to, was identified two other people who were partners and were also involved. And it transpired that these two individuals, along with the male that was arrested near this fire, had taken possession of Ellen's property, disposed of it.
Police, they made 2 further arrests in and around the Orrell area.
The 2 further suspects are arrested and taken into custody. A 30-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman. They are also from the Billinge area. Who are these 3 suspects? And what is their involvement in Ellen's death? As police dig further, they find no forensic evidence linking the trio to the murder scene. But then, police receive DNA results from the belt, which changes the course of the investigation.
A gent's belt that was near Ellen had both Ellen's DNA and also matched that of a man.
It matched a man called Mark Buckley.
Then I made the decision to declare him as a suspect and arrest him on suspicion of murder.
Police! You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something you're later aligning in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Would you like to make any response to that? Anything to say?
Pardon?
Anything to say to that?
Can you let me?
Yes, have you got keys on you? Or
Yeah.
The keys? The keys are there, are they? Right. Okay. Well, we'll secure your property for you. Don't worry about that.
Police now have 4 suspects in custody.
We're going to take you back to reservation now for questioning. Right.
But what is the connection between Mark Buckley and the trio who were accused of disposing of Ellen's belongings? Could Ellen's murder have been a group attack? Officers delve into Mark Buckley's background.
Mark Buckley was 52 years old. He had been staying with his mother in a nearby address. He did have previous convictions, but nothing that would have particularly flagged up that he was about to go out and commit this kind of offence.
He'd been arrested over an arson incident in which he'd set fire to a neighbour's car. There were a couple of other minor matters on his police record. A fray was one of them, but absolutely nothing on this sort of scale or severity.
Despite the forensic evidence against him, Mark Buckley denies any involvement with Ellen's murder. But police uncover CCTV evidence, which shows Buckley heading towards Orrell Water Park just after 1 p.m.
We managed to track some of his movements, and what that did show, he goes out in the early afternoon, and it was very warm on that day. He was wearing quite a heavy coat, long trousers, and he had like a green shopping carrier bag. And as he's going out, that looks fairly empty. We then see from the same camera Buckley coming back sometime later. When he comes back, this bag is clearly full. He's no longer wearing his coats, he's just wearing a vest, and he's just wearing shorts.
Despite being confronted with video evidence, Buckley continues to deny any involvement in Ellen's murder. But then the other suspects in custody start to speak. Not only do they say they are friends with Buckley, but they describe how they came to have Ellen's possessions.
Transpired that Mark Buckley had been to the 3 offenders. He had passed on a rucksack with items including a laptop and keys that he'd stolen from Ellen. He had also sold on her mobile phone to one of them as well.
With the evidence against Buckley mounting up, he finally cracks.
When he was questioned by detectives, Buckley, in the end, confessed fairly quickly to killing Ellen.
Mark Buckley is charged on suspicion of Ellen Higginbottom's murder, while the other 3 suspects are charged with perverting the course of justice in knowingly disposing of evidence. But what actually happened on that fateful summer night when Ellen was killed? "52-year-old Mark Buckley has been charged with the murder of 18-year-old student Ellen Higginbottom, after he admitted to police that he was the man responsible."
Mark Buckley did admit that he killed her. He said hello and then dragged her off the path. Didn't give any explanation, clearly didn't want to admit any sexual elements.
He was fairly quickly contrite as to the killing itself, but he always maintained that there was no sexual activity or sexual motivation behind his crime.
After Mark Buckley allegedly sold on items stolen from Ellen after the murder took place, attention turns to the other 3 suspects from Billinge. 2 men aged 47 and 30, and a 31-year-old woman.
3 other people were on charges related to assisting the offender or involvement in the crime.
They were charged with perverting the course of justice in that they got rid of evidence and handling the stolen laptop.
3 months after Ellen's murder, Mark Buckley appears at Manchester Crown Court to enter a formal plea. As he arrives in the courtroom, he cuts a subdued figure.
We went to the court, you just see somebody coming up the gantry. Yeah, it looked like he put a lot of weight on. He stared straight at me and my partner, and he walked to the front, and basically we heard what he'd done.
He showed very little reaction to the brief proceedings. He spoke only to confirm his name and address. The defence said that he expressed remorse and regret to his lawyer for what he had done, but could give very little explanation of his actions or motive.
Mark Buckley formally pleads guilty to the murder of Ellen Higginbottom. And when he returns to the court for sentencing, information about his past comes to light.
Mark Buckley grew up round here. Most of our regulars knew him. I knew him personally. He sometimes used to come in the pub.
I have known of him and known where he lived for, like, I'd say, 39 years, since I was about 10, because he used to live with his mum and his grandma next door to my nan.
Mark Buckley was a bit strange, really. He was a bit of a loner. There never seemed to be that much harm in him.
He, in the local area, was basically always a bit of an oddball, a bit of a loner. We'd always get stories about him, always doing something. In the local area, people were wary of him.
Buckley's past criminal convictions are revealed to the courtroom.
I can go back to August 2012. I got married and we was living near where Mark was living, and we come back the next morning to find out that he'd torched his next door neighbour's car.
I remember walking down that day and there was a vehicle, I think it was a Land Rover, that had been fired, and it was him who did it.
I'd heard that he'd had an argument with some family, to which he basically blew the car up with petrol, etc., and there was actually a crater in the floor where he'd done it.
In 2012, Buckley was sentenced to 2.5 years for arson and criminal damage. After serving his time, he came back to the village of Orrell.
When he actually came out of prison and he came in this pub, he was making out, when he walked through the door, like as a celebrity's come, he was still bragging about that and what he was going to do to people over that. He was still the same lad, unhinged.
Feeling disturbed by his return, The local community had come together to raise their concerns with the police.
People was basically scared of him coming in the area.
As a result, police relocate Buckley to nearby Preston. But despite this, the court hears how he still found a way of returning to his childhood village of Orrell.
I honestly believe that he was saying he was coming to see his mother, but not making out that he was staying over here. So the Preston flat what he had was vacated, and then he was coming here, staying with his mother for 3, 4, 5 days sometimes. A lot of people was anxious and scared about that.
Tragically, the community's fear and suspicions around Buckley come into fruition on the morning of the 16th of June, 2017, when Buckley enters Orrell Water Park at 5:30 a.m.
Buckley had been in the park probably from almost first light that day. Early morning dog walkers recall seeing Buckley.
Mark Buckley, police discovered, had been in the area for quite some time. He had been scoping out the area on the Friday.
Basically, Mark was on the prowl round the water park, and different people had come forward saying an individual was preying on young women.
He approached a number of women who were walking alone and then let them go.
Several hours later, Buckley returns home, but decides to revisit the park again at 1 p.m, perhaps more determined to find a victim. By chance, Ellen Higginbottom has just finished her final exam and enters the park at 2 p.m. She had no idea what would be waiting for her.
On that afternoon, he selected his victim as Ellen Higginbottom when she wandered alone into the water park. She was a very petite girl. She stood 5'4". She was very slightly built, and he was able to overpower her very easily.
After the murder, which we believe took place probably around 2:30 in the afternoon, it would seem that he was still in the vicinity of the park. He tried to get rid of what would have been heavily blood-stained clothing.
The court hears from witnesses who saw Buckley in the park that afternoon with scratches across his body.
Eyewitnesses recall him making some excuse that he was rather hot and bothered because he'd had a bit of an episode with the dog, and some of the scratches, which were probably poor Ellen's defensive actions that had caused those, he blamed on getting tangled up with the bushes in his lead and his dog.
2 hours after Ellen's murder, Buckley finally returns home wearing only shorts and a vest, while carrying a bag believed to contain his blood-stained clothing, as well as Ellen's stolen belongings. Buckley then sells the items to his friends, the trio from Billinge, claiming he found them in the park.
It became clear that these people used drugs. It was a chance to make some money, and ultimately some of the money that they received for items that, you know, they'd taken possession of was spent on drugs, and it was as simple as that, really.
And later that night, as news of Ellen's disappearance was spreading through the village, Buckley returns to the scene of the crime.
It would appear that Buckley decided to go back later to try to hide Ellen's body. He'd gone back with a spade, and the police were still at that stage searching for Ellen. His activities in the park registered on a heat-seeking camera that the police were deploying during their search. He was seen effectively by the police in what we believe was an attempt to make a better job at hiding poor Ellen's body in the undergrowth.
The prosecution puts its theory to the court as to what lay behind Buckley's crime.
When we presented the case at the Crown Court, we maintained that there was a sexual element to the crime. Mark Buckley denied and continued to deny throughout that there was any sexual motivation or activity associated with the killing.
But it's revealed to the courtroom that following searches of Buckley's address, police discovered a bag.
That bag was recovered from inside a bin. It was heavily blood-stained inside. And it also, in the bottom of it, was still what I can only describe as a rape kit.
He was found to be in possession of condoms and lubricants and other unsavoury items in a carrier bag he had with him. So we left the court in no doubt that this was sexually linked, although there was no charge of rape or indecent assault, sexual assault or anything of that nature.
And the court also hears further shocking evidence from that fateful afternoon.
A witness actually came forward to say they heard what sounded like a man and a woman having sex within the trees. And unbeknown to that particular witness, I'm confident that that was Buckley assaulting Ellen. I'm confident about that because of the time and particularly the location. The location was subsequently identified as the attack site.
On the 14th of September 2017, the judge imposes his sentence and accepts there was a sexual motivation to the murder. Buckley is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 31 years behind bars.
We went to the court. As he was walking down to the thing, you seen him just basically go and puff down. And I honestly don't think he's got any remorse.
I think the sentence Mark got was really a bit of a disgrace. What he did was absolutely disgusting, and he should never be allowed out in the community again.
After pleading guilty to perverting the course of justice, the 47-year-old man from Billinge is given a suspended 2-year sentence and ordered to do unpaid work. The couple also from Billinge are sentenced, with the 30-year-old man receiving 20 months behind bars, while the 31-year-old woman is given a 16-month suspended sentence.
He lied to the police, they'll get rid of property and handling stolen goods. And, you know, to behave like that, knowing full well what Buckley had actually done, and still get engaged in that, in destroying evidence and handling Ellen's belongings, is actually pretty despicable in my book.
With Mark Buckley now behind bars, the community of Orrell tried to come to terms with what happened on their doorstep.
It did change Orrell. It's not just what he's done to the girl. The people going to the college, all her family, all her friends.
God knows what that family must have gone through. Really, you know what I mean? It's not, you have kids and basically the kids bury you. You don't bury your kids, you know what I mean?
I recall Mike and Kay being relieved, I think, not pleased. I think they were satisfied that Ellen's killer had been brought to justice.
And in the centre of Orrell sits a lasting memory to the popular student who once had her whole life ahead of her.
The community, after Ellen Higginbottom's death, came together and created a garden. It pays tribute to Ellen, her love of nature and animals, and there is a little library contained within it as well, where people can just leave spare books and can take books as well, which I think it was felt would be fitting to someone who loved her studies and would clearly have probably gone on to university and then a professional career of some kind.
If we could identify who had made those bite marks, was another way of identifying who had carried out the murder.
You just couldn't take it in, because something like that doesn't happen to you, and especially in Dereham.
He had no remorse, he was just pure evil. In April 2008, an ambulance was called to a flat in Dereham, where the paramedics found the body of a woman with stab wounds and bite marks to her face and chin. What began as a simple murder case turned into one of the most challenging investigations that Norfolk police had ever dealt with. Situated halfway between Norwich and King's Lynn is the town of Dereham, home to 47-year-old mother of three, Elaine Walpole. On Tuesday, the 29th of April 2008, a friend raised the alarm after not seeing Elaine for a few days.
Elaine's neighbour hadn't seen Elaine since the Saturday. They used to see each other every day, and so he was concerned that she may have fallen and had some sort of medical episode in her flat and called an ambulance.
Paramedics had forced their way into the property, where they saw Elaine dead on the floor. DCI Fry of Norfolk Police's major investigation team took over the case the following day and went straight to the flat.
The scene was really quite chaotic. There were smashed plates and things strewn all over the floor. Some of the contents of drawers that had been pulled out and the fronts broken off. It was really very untidy.
DCI Fry needed to quickly establish what had gone on.
It was a case of door-to-door inquiries. Intelligence needed to be gathered around what we knew about Elaine, what we knew about any of her family and friends. Anything that had been happening in that particular area of Dereham. Had there been a spate of burglaries going on that she might have disturbed someone? Just a general gathering of intelligence that may assist the inquiry.
While police were making inquiries, the forensic team at the crime scene were building up a picture of events leading up to Elaine's murder.
The state of the crime scene, to me, does suggest that there was some sort of altercation, fight, argument. But it does seem to go beyond what would have occurred just as a result of a struggle. The whole thing really seems to speak of somebody who was very angry, maybe seeking to intimidate and dominate, and really maybe demonstrate power and control.
The residents of peaceful and picturesque Dereham were oblivious to what had happened.
Dereham is a good place to live. It's at the very heart of one of the loveliest counties in the country, Norfolk. So it's surrounded by beautiful countryside. And it's a place where you can get to know people and be known.
Dereham's a fairly tight-knit community. Everybody gets on with everybody, I think. Quite a lot of us know what everybody else is doing. Not always for the good. But generally, yeah, it's a pretty good community spirit around Dereham. People look after each other.
Police quickly established that Elaine had family living locally. Unfortunately, they were about to receive some devastating news.
I was at home with my children when I got a phone call to say my mum had died. It didn't seem real. I just felt numb. After I got the phone call, I phoned my sister. She was at work.
My sister called my manager and asked me to call her back immediately. It was really urgent. At that time, I didn't know what was going on, so I called my sister as quickly as I could. She told me that Mum had died, and that's all we knew. We didn't know how, we didn't know when, we didn't know why. We just knew that she was dead.
I first heard of my sister's death in the bank in Dereham. Everything was going through my head because you don't want to believe it.
We all went round to my Auntie Jackie's to see if anyone could shed any light on what had happened, because at that point no one told us anything. The police didn't tell us anything. No one told us what was going on. We sort of had to use our imagination, I guess, and try and work out what had happened. So that was quite difficult.
Until a post-mortem was carried out, police couldn't be certain about Elaine's cause of death. All they had to go on so far was what they had found at the scene.
Elaine lay with her head in the kitchen, and there's a pool of blood around her head. She was naked from the waist down, and she had several stab wounds, including one that went through her neck. There were some what looked like perfectly round circular marks, one on her right cheek and one on her chin. And initially I thought possibly she'd been hit with the bottom of a beer bottle with that slight stippling.
Police needed to identify the mystery marks, a clue that could lead to the killer.
I've been to probably between 50 and 70 scenes where there has been an unexplained or suspicious death, and you know, they can be extremely upsetting, but you focus on the job and really put it out of your mind, because you know, there's a job to do. Initially, with the examination of the scene, it was unclear how Elaine had died. It was rated as an unexplained death. The following morning, when the post-mortem examination results came through, which showed that she had 3 stab wounds and about 50 other injuries, including the 2 unexplained injuries on her cheek and her chin, I upgraded it to suspicious death.
Suspicious death was a term police used for probable murder. It was time to share this news with her family.
When we found out that my mum had been stabbed, me and my family, we just couldn't believe it. We were shocked. Couldn't believe it at all.
Devastated, shocked. I was just unreal, really. You just couldn't take it in, because something like that doesn't happen to you, and especially in Dereham. You know, we were just, totally in shock.
The investigation team needed to look further into evidence found at the crime scene for clues that would lead them to Elaine's killer.
A knife was found on an arm of the sofa near to where Elaine lay that was identified as the knife that had been used to stab her. There was a broken bottle on the floor in the lounge that revealed a fingerprint. There were some boxer shorts still on the floor there, and a receipt from where she'd been to the shop the previous Saturday. That led to an inquiry to go and find out what she'd bought. And then that shop had CCTV, so we looked at securing that CCTV and looking through that to see if she was with anyone or if there was anything of value to be gained from there.
Accessing the shop's CCTV footage and identifying the fingerprint would take a while, so the police looked further into Elaine's life.
Elaine had a son and 2 daughters. All of them lived in the Dereham area. Clearly a close bond between them, and she obviously looked forward to their visits.
Elaine was born in Hackney in London in 1960 and moved to Dereham aged 19 in the late 70s.
She got told she couldn't have children, but later on she found out that she was due to have twins, and obviously she was ecstatic, really. You know, we was all happy for her. And then she had twin girls, and then she went on to have a little boy.
I used to go and visit my mum every Friday with my nan and my children, and on the Friday before she died, she was laughing around with the children, dancing and singing with them. My mum was quite a private person. She didn't have many friends. One of her friends was her neighbour, and he used to visit her as well.
Essentially, she lived quite an isolated life. Her family visited her regularly, and she had a routine of going to the shop every day and then returning home and spending most of the day on her own or in the company of a neighbour or whatever in her own flat.
It was clear to police that the person who saw Elaine most regularly was the neighbour that had reported her missing.
When we first found out what had happened to Mum, we all assumed it was her neighbour because she'd had run-ins with him in the past. So we all automatically assumed it was him.
A planned arrest was made on the neighbour to try to either eliminate him from the investigation or see whether he was actually responsible. That gave the opportunity to do a proper search of his flat, recover his clothing to see if there was any transfer of bodily fluids. Having arrested the neighbour, he was interviewed and he was able to give an account of his movements from the last sighting of Elaine right through till the Tuesday, which we followed up on. And it was clear within a few hours that it was unlikely that he was actually involved in her murder, and therefore he was bailed so that we could focus our resources elsewhere.
One day into the inquiry, it was clear that Elaine Walpole's neighbour was innocent, leaving the police with no suspects. Without a concrete lead, finding her killer was some way off. Police were investigating the death of 47-year-old Elaine Walpole, found stabbed to death in her home in April 2008. They believed it was murder, and news of the crime had spread in the normally safe town of Dereham.
The time of Elaine's murder, I was running a pub just up the road, just a few minutes walk away from the flats that she was killed in. It was a big shock to everybody. Things like that don't seem to happen around here. And it was a shock.
Dereham is a very low crime area. There's no doubt about that. The statistics prove it. And so when something like this happens, we can't come to terms with it very easily, and there's this element of unknown and what's happened and just basic shock.
That was on the news, in the paper, on the radio. Everywhere you sort of went, there was everybody talking about it, so you couldn't really keep it private. I used to hold my head down sometimes in town when I went in town, because I thought, oh God, who's looking at me now? Because I felt like everybody was looking at you.
The police were waiting on forensic tests from the crime scene, and before long, results started to filter through.
After 2 days, the fingerprint from the bottle in the lounge was identified, and it was shown to be that from a young man called Juvenile Ferreira.
Records stated that Juvenile Ferreira was a 16-year-old boy from the Gambia.
The problem was the fingerprint was on a bottle, which is a movable item, and therefore, conceivably, he may have been into a shop, picked a bottle up, put it back down again, then Elaine gone in later, selected the bottle and taken it back to her flat. So the fact that his fingerprint was in her flat was interesting, but the fact that it was on a movable item meant that I couldn't call him a suspect at that stage.
Police had also discovered a shop receipt from 3 days before Elaine's body was found, and had been waiting for access to the corresponding CCTV.
The receipt found in Elaine's lounge identified a purchase in a local shop at around about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and by looking at the CCTV, we identified that she was in the shop with Juvenile Ferreira. A clear image of him on the CCTV, facially and from behind, clearly with Elaine, selecting some alcohol and then leaving with her. So with the images of Ferreira in the shop and the fingerprint in Elaine's flat, he was obviously becoming of greater interest, but not necessarily enough to be technically called a suspect.
There was time to investigate Juvenile Ferreira further.
Police National Computer is a tool that police officers use every day. If they suspect a car to have been stolen, they will check that on the computer. If they stop someone for some reason, they will check on the Police National Computer. If that person's wanted, it will be logged on there. And their criminal history is also logged on the computer, so they will know what those sort of people have been up to.
Ferreira was showing up on the Police National Computer as having been arrested a few hours after he was spotted on the shop's CCTV footage with Elaine.
Ferreira had initially acted quite strangely in the memorial gardens around lunchtime on the Saturday, where there were some people taking photographs, etc., and he'd acted a little strangely towards a lady there. He'd then gone to a garage sale on the Norwich Road somewhere between the shop where he'd been seen with Elaine and Elaine's home address, and he was at the garage sale there, and again, quite upset, one of the ladies there, and was asked to leave. Also, around that time, it would appear that he met up with a young lad on a nearby road, asked to borrow his bicycle, and rode off on it. That bicycle was found in Elaine's flat.
After stealing the bike, Juvenile Ferreira was spotted at around 4 p.m. on the CCTV with Elaine, and he continued to cause disturbances in Dereham that evening.
He went into the centre of town, where his behaviour became quite odd. He was leering through a window at a young girl there. He lay on the bonnet of a car and was acting very strangely. Several different young couples were concerned at the way he was behaving. And then he went into a supermarket, grabbed, I think, a bottle of wine and ran out of the supermarket. And it was as he was running away, he was rugby tackled to the ground by a member of the public who happened to be someone from a nearby army base. The police arrested Ferreira and took him to the police station, where he was found to be really quite inebriated, unfit for interview, and so he was searched and put into a cell overnight. He was found to have no underwear on, but he was basically laid down for the night to sober up, and then he was interviewed the following morning about the theft from the supermarket and his conduct in the centre of Dereham. Before Ferreira's release, Ferreira's fingerprints and DNA were taken.
2 days later, Elaine's dead body had been found.
At that point, we didn't know exactly when Elaine had died. We didn't know that Ferreira was actually responsible for that. We knew he was involved in this fracas in Dereham, but there were still many questions left to be answered and a lot of detail to be found.
Police now knew Ferreira had been acting strangely around the time of Elaine's murder, and that he was one of the last people to have seen her alive. But they needed more concrete evidence.
The next big step forward was a DNA hit. Swabs taken from Elaine's body had been sent to the forensic laboratory, and semen from Juvenile Ferreira was found on those swabs. A clear link between the incident and Juvenile Ferreira, and he was now a suspect.
Elaine and Ferreira were from different walks of life, but the bodily fluids indicated she'd had sexual contact with this 16-year-old boy. It was the evidence the police had been waiting for.
So now we had DNA from Ferreira on Elaine, and putting that together with the fingerprint, the CCTV image of her with him, he became the main suspect, and he was put on the police national computer as a wanted person.
Juvenile Ferreira's elevated status meant that all UK police forces were on red alert, ready to seize him should they come into contact with him.
Almost simultaneously to the DNA hit coming through, we received a phone call from Hertfordshire Police. They had stopped Juvenile Ferreira in Hoddesdon, and I was able to tell them to arrest him and take him back to the police station.
Back at the station, police began to piece together his movements after causing mayhem in Norfolk 11 days earlier.
Having been released from the police station in Dereham, he'd returned home, and then the following morning he'd made his way to London, where he'd tried to get on to the Eurostar.
Just a day after he was seen with Elaine, Ferreira had tried to flee the country.
He wasn't allowed to get on because his papers only allowed him entry to the UK and not to the Eurozone as a whole. And he then made his way to Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire.
In Hertfordshire, Ferreira had shoplifted, got into fights and robbed people, revealing a picture of a youth out of control. He had been in and out of police custody, beginning on Saturday the 26th of April, the day of Elaine Walpole's suspected murder. Finally, the net was closing in on the police's prime suspect, in Elaine Walpole's horrific murder. In Norfolk, all the evidence in Elaine Walpole's murder was pointed to one man, and the police were desperate to talk to him. Elaine had been found naked from the waist down, with multiple injuries, and Juvenile Ferreira, aged 16, was the young man police had arrested for her murder, but not yet charged.
Following Ferreira's arrest, I arranged for a search of his home address to be carried out, and in his bedroom, several items that linked him to Elaine's murder were found. A purse belonging to Elaine was found there, a SIM card and a phone, and there was a pair of boots with a blood stain on it, and that was later found to be Elaine's blood. He was represented in the interviews and basically said very little. I remember the interviewing sergeant saying to me that he was very surprised Ferreira seemed a lot older. But we carried on with the interviews, he said very little, and then gradually as we gathered all the different evidence together, the property found, there was his DNA, I was in a position to approach the CPS and ask to charge him with murder.
The CPS agreed, and on the 10th of May 2008, 11 days after Elaine Walpole's body had been found, Juvenile Ferreira was charged.
Juvenile Ferreira was charged with murder, but as a juvenile, he had to be treated differently. He was kept in a different prison, and if convicted, would be subject to different term of imprisonment. Roughly a third of that he'd be expected as an adult.
Well, when we got told by the police that they'd caught someone, obviously we were, I don't know, we were sort of like, your mind's all over the place, because obviously you're happy that someone's been caught, but obviously we wanted to know who it was and why. So obviously it was all in sort of like mixed emotions, really.
Ferreira was held on remand at Feltham Young Offenders Institute while police continued investigating him, discovering that he'd moved to Durham from the Gambia in 2007. But confirming Ferreira's age was proving to be difficult.
We still had our suspicions that Ferreira was older than he was actually saying. Inquiries in the Gambia with the Attorney General indicated that travel documents could be obtained just by saying what your date of birth is without any evidence, and therefore they weren't a real true reflection of someone's date of birth. Ferreira's mother, who had moved to England, wanted to take him from the Gambia back to England, and therefore had applied for his travel documents stating a date of birth that made him at that time under 16 and a dependent. The Attorney General on my behalf made inquiries at the school where Ferreira had been and obtained his school certificate, but because he'd moved from Guinea-Bissau, where he was born, to the Gambia, we couldn't be absolutely sure when he'd started his school, and therefore that wasn't evidence of his birth and his age.
Not being able to clarify Ferreira's age was a blow, but the police still had work to do in preparation for the trial, so focused on his relationship with Elaine.
We wanted to know how Ferreira met Elaine, how well he knew her, and from inquiries it appeared that Ferreira was refused to purchase either alcohol or cigarettes in the shop and had gone outside and then asked Elaine to buy something for him, then returned into the shop and then walked away from the shop in the direction of her home address with her. As far as we know, that was the first time he had met Elaine.
Ferreira's semen was found on Elaine's dead body, pointing to sexual contact between them. But to add sexual assault to the existing murder charge, DCI Fry had to disprove consensual sex. Police needed to find out more about Elaine's personal life, and they returned to the family.
Elaine would always tell you stuff. Even if you didn't want to know about it, she'd soon tell you about things. So, yeah, she'd definitely tell you if she had a boyfriend.
I'd never heard of him. She'd never mentioned him to any of us, so we were very shocked that she would be involved with someone so young, We didn't know anything about him or why they would even come to be acquaintances in the first place.
As far as her family were concerned, Elaine wasn't in a relationship with anyone at the time of her death, let alone a random 16-year-old boy. The suggestion was upsetting, and more distressing was that they still hadn't been able to lay Elaine to rest.
One thing that the family found very difficult to deal with was the delay in being able to hold Elaine's funeral. The problem is that we hold our post-mortem as soon as we can, but the defence have the right to hold their own post-mortem so that they can check the evidence that we've obtained. And therefore we have to have caught someone, charged them, and then given the defence the opportunity to carry out their own post-mortem. And in this case, the defence delayed and the post-mortem wasn't carried out for several months.
Having the funeral after 4 months, it was obviously a huge weight had lifted off our shoulders that we were able to have the funeral. But we knew that the trial was coming up, so we still had that to deal with. So we were still all really anxious and worried about the outcome of the trial.
Unfortunately for Elaine's family, a new development at Feltham Young Offenders Institute suggested Ferreira wasn't going down without a fight.
Whilst we were preparing the case, we were contacted by the prison where Ferreira was being kept, and we were told that he had written on the wall of his cell, "I didn't kill her, she was my girlfriend, for goodness sake, I'm only a kid." This gave an indication of the defence that Ferreira may be putting forward at court, that he knew Elaine, that she was his girlfriend, and it's quite common for people to remain sort of denying the offence right through the system.
Graffiti, more commonly, is a way in which individuals make a statement about themselves to the world. It's how they want to be seen. Now, that might have a tactical element in that he's trying to influence people's views of his culpability, but it could be that he's trying to convince himself, because some sexual murderers don't like admitting even to themselves what they've done.
Police now had to prove that Elaine and Ferreira were not in a relationship as he claimed, and that a violent sexual assault had taken place. They went back to the evidence from the crime scene.
A big conundrum was the injury to Elaine's face, to her cheek and her chin. It looked like a circle of identical marks, if you like. Could it have been the bottom of a bottle? Could it have been a pill packet in someone's hand as they struck her on the face? What had caused those marks? So I contacted the National Injuries Database for their expert opinion. And they said to me that it's a possibility that it was bite marks. They provided me with several experts, and I decided to contact forensic odontologist Freddie Martin.
It was now turning into an incredibly complex investigation for Norfolk Police, needing to call on a forensic odontologist, otherwise known as a forensic dentist, to help them out.
Forensic odontology is extremely useful to police and prosecutors. On the crime side, it's not uncommon in murder cases for the perpetrator of the murder to bite their victims. And they might bite them extremely viciously as well. Sometimes they're very vicious biting. And in rape cases, for instance, it's very common to find bite marks. And by examining the bite, photographing it, taking impressions from suspects and that sort of thing, it is often possible to match up the perpetrator with the victim.
I sent Freddie photographs of the injuries, and after careful consideration, he was willing to give his expert opinion that they were bite marks. This was exciting because if we could identify who had made those bite marks, It was another way of identifying who had carried out the murder, but also it helped towards boxing off any defence as to consensual sex.
DCI Fry needed to prove these bite marks belonged to juvenile Ferreira, to charge him with sexual assault as well as murder. The police also needed to prove their suspicions that he was over 18. But with less than 2 weeks until the trial, the investigation team were running out of time. Police in Dereham had been investigating the death of Elaine Walpole, stabbed to death in her Norfolk home in 2008. They had charged 16-year-old juvenile Ferreira with murder and were keen to add a sexual assault charge after his DNA was found on her body.
So the swabs from Elaine's body were sent as a priority, and other exhibits followed later on. As it happens, the boxer shorts that had been found there, later on, they were found to have Ferreira's DNA on.
With only 2 weeks until the trial, the police had a limited amount of time to prove that bite marks found on Elaine's body had been inflicted by Ferreira.
In order to prove that he had created the bites, we would need teeth impressions, and the problem with that is that they're classed as intimate samples and they can't be taken other than with the consent of the person. And when we approached Ferreira's solicitor, he refused. Without the dental impressions, we couldn't prove that Ferreira had caused those marks on her face. However, we would be able to bring it to the attention of the court that Ferreira had refused, and therefore an adverse inference could be made against Ferreira in the subsequent trial.
This meant the judge could tell the jury that Ferreira had refused to produce the dental impressions, knowing it might hurt his defence.
The solicitor rang CPS on the Thursday before the trial and said that they would give permission, clearly in order to stop any adverse inference being made.
The police had just 1 working day before the trial to get the evidence they needed from juvenile Ferreira.
I rang the odontologist and he said that he'd get onto it straight away. He went to the prison the next day, obtained the teeth impressions, worked on them over the weekend, and by the Monday he had positive proof that the bite marks were made by juvenile Ferreira biting Elaine on her face and on her chin.
The new evidence meant that 16-year-old juvenile Ferreira stood trial charged with both the murder and rape of Elaine Walpole, with the police confident she had never had consensual sex with him.
Throughout the trial, juvenile Ferreira maintained a defence that he was in a relationship with Elaine and that he had consensual sex with her and had left her alive and well on the Saturday and had no knowledge of her murder. This was clearly upsetting for the family, him suggesting that he was in a relationship with her, which they didn't believe at all, and it was really the only way he had to go to try and explain the sexual element to the offence.
We had no idea why they would be associated with each other. They seemingly come from different walks of life. Obviously, my mum was a lot older than him. We don't know why their paths would have crossed.
One can only speculate, but it is possible that he experienced something like a perceived rejection, or that she wouldn't comply, maybe with sexual advances. Perhaps because of the state that he was in with the alcohol, or the emotional state he was in generally. Maybe he was just all too ready to take out his feelings on her.
In his defence, Ferreira claimed that on the Sunday after his release from the police station, he'd returned to Elaine's flat and found her dead. He said that he was shocked by what he saw. He'd moved the knife, he'd got blood on his hands, and he'd washed his hands, and that somehow that's how blood from Elaine had got onto his boot. At some point he claimed that it was possibly a drug dealer that had committed the offence, again upsetting the family. And when he was challenged as to why he hadn't reported what he found to the police, he said that he'd gone to the police station but was too scared to go inside, and so he hadn't reported it. He continued to deny biting Elaine. He continued to deny any violence towards Elaine, but he did admit stealing some of her jewellery.
Having stayed silent in interviews, Ferreira was now claiming he had known Elaine was dead before the police did, but wasn't responsible for the killing.
Going into court and seeing him standing there, the person that killed my mum, was horrible. I made eye contact with him and he stared me out. He had no remorse, he was just pure evil.
DCI Fry felt the prosecution had a strong case against Ferreira, with CCTV, fingerprints and DNA evidence, plus the forensic dentist who took the stand.
Freddie Martin was obviously a key witness, and he came along to provide the evidence that Ferreira had caused the bites on her face. And as we waited outside court, I spoke to Freddie about our problems identifying a real age for Ferreira, and I said to him, it's a pity you can't age someone by their teeth like you can a horse. And Freddie turned to me and said, well, you can.
When you're trying to prove that somebody's over the age of 18, or whether they're under the age of 18, then it is the third molar tooth, the wisdom tooth, that is the one that's going to give you that essential bit of information. You would expect that tooth to start to erupt into the mouth about 16, and 3 years later you would expect the root of that tooth to be fully formed.
This new information was an important breakthrough. If Ferreira had fully formed wisdom teeth, he would be at least 19 years old. But the prosecution and the defence had already given evidence, and the jury were now ready with their verdict.
On the 15th of December 2008, Ferreira was found guilty by a unanimous verdict.
He was convicted of the murder and rape of Elaine Walpole.
When he'd been found guilty, it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders, and finally my mum could have some peace.
It was at this point, if he'd been sentenced as a juvenile, he would have got a third of the sentence that he would as an adult. And this was the point where we approached the judge through the barrister to ask for more time to prove Ferreira's true age.
A conviction for murder and rape would have meant just 8 years in prison if Ferreira was sentenced as a juvenile.
After the guilty verdict, we then got told that it would be adjourned until further investigation on his age, and we were relieved that they were actually going to sort out his age and so that he would get the sentence he deserved.
As x-rays of Ferreira's teeth had recently been taken to prove he'd bitten Elaine, the police already had the medical records they needed to analyse.
Freddie Martin, the forensic odontologist, went to work on the x-rays of Ferreira's teeth to try and prove exactly how old he was. The really crushing news was that, in fact, he had a deformity in his teeth and the last set of molars weren't even there, and he couldn't prove through his teeth how old Ferreira was.
There are certain abnormalities that can occur with the development of the third molar tooth. The roots can become fused. It may have a high degree of a curve on the end of the root. It may not fully form, and then it makes it difficult for the forensic odontologist to actually use that third molar tooth as a method of age assessment of that individual.
The news was terrible, really. We'd really hoped that that would be the final thing to show how old he was, and it had been ripped away from us. And we were up against the clock. We had to get some sort of evidence to prove his age before he was due to come back for sentencing. I talked it through with Freddie, and he said, well, there are other ways of proving someone's age. There are different bones in the body that develop at different stages. The wrists, for instance, the bones in the clavicle, through the sternum. But he said he wasn't really the right expert to do that. We needed our own expert, a forensic anthropologist, to give expert evidence as to Ferreira's age through his bones. there was a real problem here because it's so difficult to get someone out of prison for any reason, but to take them to hospital for x-rays is unheard of.
It was another race against time, as police went about trying to arrange further x-rays of Ferreira, now a convicted murderer. Ferreira's defence were also making things difficult for the investigation.
The defence demanded that their expert be present when the x-rays were taken, but the prison said that no one was allowed to know where the procedure would take place beforehand, and therefore we had to arrange for the defence expert to be picked up by police officers and taken to an unknown location to be present as the x-rays were taken. The prison sent him along attached to the biggest prison officer you've ever seen. There was no way that they wanted any chance for him to escape.
X-rays were taken of Ferreira's body, which DCI Fry immediately sent to their forensic anthropologist to analyse.
Julie Roberts was able to say, through the development of the radius of the bones within his wrist, that Ferreira was probably around 21 years old, but at the very least 19. That meant he was an adult. That meant that he would be sentenced as an adult.
On the 27th of March 2009, after an 11-month investigation, juvenile Ferreira went back to court and was sentenced, as an adult, to 22 years imprisonment, roughly 3 times what he would have got as a juvenile.
This was excellent news. Every time we thought that we were getting somewhere, there'd be another block put in the way. And it was a long journey, but this was the end of the road, and we were able to achieve exactly what we set out for.
The police were amazing. They went above and beyond what we ever thought they would do to secure a long sentence for us.
I think everyone was just relieved that after so long, we'd finally gotten justice for Mum. Although it won't bring her back, we are happy with the sentencing, and we can just try and move on and obviously never forget her and what happened, but we can...
It still doesn't seem real that my mum's not here anymore. It's just like a nightmare, really. You never think it's going to happen to you as a family, but it's happened to us.
She's too young. She shouldn't be there. She should be here. She should be here with us. We all have a miss her.
Thanks to Norfolk Police's dedication to the pursuit of justice, juvenile Ferreira started a full and just sentence for the murder of mother and grandmother Elaine Walpole that would keep him in jail until what the police believe will be well into his 40s.
Beware the shadows. Who knows what danger lurks? Take the darkest fairy tale and bring it into modern times, weeknights at 10 on Sky Mix. Grim.
emergency? How can I help you?
It was a violent, frenzied and very, very aggressive attack. It almost severed his head.
If members of the public have any information at all, this was an 83-year-old family man. It was a brutal attack with no known motive at this time.
It's such a quiet and peaceful place. It just seemed incredible it could happen here.
This was the biggest manhunt.
From the instant I saw him, I realised he didn't fit in. I do regret not following him to see where he went.
Can you explain to me why your DNA is on that man?
East Harling, a quaint village nestled in the heart of the South Norfolk countryside.
It's a lovely little place to live in. It's really quiet, but it's got a lot of sense of community, a lot of pockets of very different helpful people, sports, and there's a couple of pubs.
Really nice place to live, safe place really. You know, everyone a lot of people know each other around here.
With its bountiful forests and country walks to enjoy a quieter pace of life, Harling and its neighbouring villages are the perfect places for many to set up home.
People usually say hello to you and you can stop and have a conversation. A lot of dog walkers in the area, of which I'm one. And, you know, they definitely always speak, pass the time of day with you.
Harling Heath, a really, really nice place to walk, and we use it for biking, running and dog walking.
The heathlands on the edge of the villages has long been a draw for dog walkers. But this idyllic setting was shattered early one morning when a body was discovered in brambles on the heath.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
He was found by a couple that were walking their dogs. They saw his dogs walking without anyone, and then as they approached the scene, they could see some blood on the ground and his body partly covered by some brambles just off the pathway. The police were called.
I just remember it was a Saturday, I was at home, and I just remember hearing these police sirens screaming through the village.
I didn't actually come to the afternoon and arrived here. So all these police cars, all these police cars around for us, but it's quite bizarre.
Rumours about the discovery of a body in undergrowth fly through the villages.
An initial assessment suggested that he may have been subject to an animal attack.
One early theory was an attack from an animal, and that was mainly led from the extent of the injuries. Obviously, there's Banham Zoo, not a huge distance away.
I was very sceptical of that because we know what's in the woods, and I can't think of a wild animal that had been over there to do such damage, to kill somebody. There isn't animals over there to do that.
The news spreads among the local dog-walking community. Could a wild animal really have attacked and killed a man on their doorstep?
There was a sense of fear, but that kind of not really believing it was going on in the village.
I think it was a bit of a shock to everybody. It's not something that happens in this area. It certainly put us off walking our dogs there for a while. I had a young daughter at the time, she was only 3, and I wasn't keen on taking her there, you know.
Rookie journalist Zach Ward was one of the first to get wind of the story.
So at the time, I felt shocked, I felt surprised. This was my first job in journalism. It was our goal to try and handle it sensitively. The stories we normally covered at This Express were very community-based. They were human interest. It was about council tax going up. It was people's 100th birthdays. It was that level of local news. So when we say things like this don't happen, that's not a cliche, it's genuine. We had really very little experience in covering this major event.
Police finally identify the body in the woods as 83-year-old Peter Wrighton. But who is he?
Mr. Wrighton was retired. He lived with his wife. He had 2 dogs, one 13 and one 9 or 10 years old, that he walked regularly.
He had retired to Banham, which is about 5 miles as the crow flies to East Harling. He'd worked for BT for 35 years. He'd been married for 59 years, and he sounded like a gentle, kind, loving man. Loved his dogs. He was walking with Gemma and Dylan at the time, and they both stayed with the body, which I think that tells you the bond between dog and owner. But he sounded like a really well-respected member of the community, and we got an outpouring of tributes and sympathy once his name had been released.
The first time we moved in, we went and introduced ourselves to the neighbours. Peter and Anne were very, very welcoming. One of our first things to do was to invite them over for a meal.
They were always friendly. You'd go over there, they're always welcome to. And obviously they used to take their dogs out for a walk, both of them. And they loved dogs. They took in a lot of rescue dogs.
Father of 2, Peter was a daily visitor with his 2 dogs to the Heath, just a few miles from his home in Banham. Tragically, on the morning of his death, his wife Anne had gone in search of him when he hadn't returned home.
Been shopping, and on my way back, I was driving by, and Anne pulled out her car and drove towards Harling. I thought that was rather unusual for her to go out and leave the house empty without them being out together. I didn't think much more of it than that.
Mr. Wrighton had failed to return home, and Mrs. Wrighton became concerned and actually drove out to the Heath to look for her husband in case possibly he'd had a medical event or become lost. As she approached the scene, she made herself known to the police, who were already there.
While Peter's wife is escorted home, his body is taken for a post-mortem examination to verify the cause of death.
When the post-mortem took place, it was established that he had received quite a violent attack, probably initially from behind. Many of the stabbing injuries were to the back of his neck and a cut across his throat that actually cut all the way back to the spinal column. May have taken 4 or 5 sideways cuts. It almost severed his head. There were other significant injuries, a stab wound that went into his left eye.
The result immediately changes the course of the investigation.
We had a phone call from Anne informing us that Peter had been murdered.
But what had gone on? Why would someone want to kill such a well-respected member of the community in such a violent way? In the quaint countryside of East Harling, a post-mortem examination has just revealed that far from being killed by a wild animal, much-loved pensioner Peter Wrighton had been murdered. But why?
I think someone may have put a suggestion forward that it could have been as a result of an animal attack. But when you consider the circumstances, it would appear the way he had been deposited, he had been dragged backwards and his arms were on top of him, which would be unlikely if he was pulled there by an animal.
Mr. Wrighton had been stabbed over 40 times, including some very deep wounds to his throat, which had almost severed his head from the rest of his body.
It was a violent and aggressive attack with only one outcome likely with the way that he was attacked.
Immediately, a murder investigation is launched to track down the killer. and everyone is a potential suspect.
This was the biggest manhunt for a long, long time.
We've got additional officers in the local area at the scene of the murder. We've also increased our patrols and our police visible presence in and around East Tarling.
They were very present, patrolling up and down the road. There was mounted police going around the village on horseback.
At the back of the forest here, the police stopped me all the cars and asking you, what, were you on that day, were you here, taking your name, your address and so forth.
Police officers involved in the investigation will have been looking for dog walkers in the area. People have routines and return to places quite regularly, and therefore they will also have people on the heath at the same time, the same day, several days after, to pick up those who regularly go and may have been there in the morning.
As the police were searching the crime scene here, they cut all the grass down really short. All this field was cut very short. All the hedgerow here was cut down to virtually nothing. I guess they're looking for the weapon, I guess.
As news spreads throughout the local dog walking community that there's a killer at large, so does the fear.
When the murder investigation started, nobody was walking the dogs over the woods. They didn't know who it was.
When people first found out about the murder, then I think it was one of complete disbelief that something like that had happened in the area. And then I think probably naturally mixed in with a bit of fear around who was this person that had committed the crime, and were they still at large?
I mean, this was in broad daylight. This was at 10:30 in the morning, potentially. So I think afterwards people were wary. I think people were wary about walking their dogs on their own.
Police established that the 5th of August 2017 started out like any other day for Peter Wrighton.
It was a very typical day for him. He'd been to the shop earlier as he was walking his dogs.
Peter was picked up on CCTV at a local shop at 9:57 a.m. His car was spotted at 10:14 a.m, heading to the heathland to walk his 2 dogs. 30 minutes later, his body was discovered.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
Mr. Wrighton's wallet was still on him. His car keys were still with him, making it unlikely that it was a robbery. The heath really is a friendly area that people go for relaxation and just to walk dogs and just to get out and get some fresh air, etc. It's not somewhere where you would expect this level of violence.
Another potential theory was around other uses of the area. One dog walker who had used the area quite regularly had mentioned to police that he thought there was suspicious activity involving drugs and people buying drugs around that area.
Police quickly rule out a robbery gone wrong. So who would want to cause this quiet, friendly pensioner harm?
The majority of murders occur between people who know each other. And so an initial line of inquiry would be to establish those people who know him and anyone who may have any sort of grudge or dislike or whatever for Mr. Wrighton. You tend to work in concentric circles around the victim, and so you look very close and then you gradually branch out and expand your inquiry, eliminating people as you go.
Peter was quite reserved, he was quite quiet, because he was such a kind, gentle soul, and happily married to Anne. It didn't make any sense. How could somebody be so wicked? To pick on somebody so kind, so loving.
His son and daughter live away and could be easily established as not having been in the Norfolk area, so that would eliminate those family members. And therefore the police then need to look further outside the family unit and expand their inquiries.
You know, we tried to think about people that knew all of us. Could it be anybody that we knew?
Any other significant friendships or relationships before his move to the area?
and we came up with no's everywhere. So it had to be random.
With no obvious clues in Peter's past, police turned to the media and the public for help.
If members of the public have any information at all, even if people think this is a small snippet of information, tell us, because it might be a small bit of information that's the final pieces of the jigsaw that we need. We're really, really keen for anybody that was in and around the area between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Saturday the 5th of August. This was an 83-year-old family man. It was a brutal attack with no known motive at this time, leaving behind a wife and children.
Another major line of inquiry is through the media to try to gain intelligence from and identify members of the public who may have been in the area at the time.
The police had appealed for information, and the initial amount of people coming forward with information was really, really high. We're talking about the hundreds.
It's important you get to people as soon as possible so that that image is as clear as possible in their minds.
Intensive questioning of local dog walkers starts to give police some leads.
That's the day of the murder. I came up the second day and the policeman said to me, "What are you doing here?" basically. I was a little bit scared because I thought perhaps maybe they would think it was me, because my footprints would be on the soil here and everything, and touch certain things, I guess, so forth. DNA, that sort of stuff, I guess. I don't know how that kind of works, but quite scary at the time.
Didn't sink in at first. And then when they're talking about, it happened such and such, and I thought, well, I was in the forest then.
So as part of the appeals, initially the police were wanting to speak to 2 male individuals and gave very detailed descriptions.
Police rule out the 2 dog walkers. But Peter Bibby is pulled in for questioning.
I had an interview at work, an interview at home, where they took all fingerprints, DNA. That's it. Good boy. They even took DNA off the dog, took all my clothes. Good boy. Yeah, it was quite harrowing, but I suppose everybody's a suspect till you're proven innocent.
But unknown to Peter, something he had witnessed on the morning of the 5th of August was about to turn the investigation on its head.
It was a normal day over the heath. Met quite a few new people, which was quite nice, a few of the people that I used to know. Yeah, just a really nice, peaceful day. Yeah, this is the route that I took. I regularly walk this route, and this gate wasn't there at the time, so I would come along here, and then I turned down and walked back through the woods and around circle. Saw somebody walking towards us, and he just didn't look right. He wasn't dressed for walking in the forest. He didn't have a dog. He wasn't with anybody else. It was just totally out of sync.
Through their inquiries, they identified another person who'd been dog walking on the heath at the time, who had spoken to someone who seemed out of place. Didn't seem to be dressed to be walking, didn't have a dog. Dog walkers tend to, it's not a uniform they wear, but they tend to dress in similar ways and know who looks in or out of place.
On his feet, he had heavy-duty flip-flops and a pair of shorts and a T-shirt. Very smartly dressed and was totally out of character for walking dogs in the forest. We were both walking up wheel ruts of a car. So I was walking up the right-hand one, he was coming down the left-hand one. When we actually passed, he was about this far away from me. I could have put my hand out and touched him. If I hadn't said hello to him, he'd have definitely walked past me and wouldn't have given me the time of day. There was no chance of any eye contact, not even any fainted little glances. He had his head forward and he was just walking forward and ignoring everything. And then he went on, and then I was wondering to myself, what's he doing? Where's he going? It's not right.
He provided an e-fit of this person that became very key to the investigation later on.
I do regret not following him to see where he went. Yeah. And that's sort of bugged me for a while.
Suddenly, police have a description of a man they believe could hold the key as to what went on that morning on the heathland. They release an EFIT. But who is this man? And is he a killer? The rural Norfolk countryside is still reeling 6 days after 83-year-old Peter Wrighton was murdered on the heathland while walking his dog.
Shocking events such as these have a significant impact on the community. One of the first things the local police inspector will do is a community impact assessment to try and reach out to the community and reassure them that the police are doing as much as they can to protect them and to resolve whatever the incident is that's happened.
Such a shock for this area because it's so safe and so sort of old-fashioned way. I guess you leave your doors unlocked, you have keys in your car, and no one expects you to get murdered. It's just quite bizarre. Afterwards, people are quite scared of walking the dogs in the forest.
Police still have no suspects, no murder weapon, and no motive.
I think any time there has been a murder in these sort of circumstances and no one's been found, there's likely to be wariness, there's likely to be some people who sadly won't want to leave the house. That shock was always there, I think. It was random, it was unprovoked, it literally could happen to anybody.
It wasn't safe for any of us. If there's a murderer already, it's murdered Peter. Was it something personal or not? We didn't know. After the murder of Peter, I was very reluctant to leave the house.
Having turned to the public for help, police receive information about a man who had stood out on the heath on the morning of the murder.
I just saw his feet first, and I thought he's wearing like heavy-duty flip-flops. It's not the sort of attire that you'd think of going dog walking. Pair of shorts on. Most people don't wear shorts through there because of the nettles, bits of bracken and all sorts of stuff like that. He was walking with a purpose.
Police release an EFIT of the man described, and suddenly there's a breakthrough. Police receive a tip-off about a local man, 24-year-old Alexander Palmer.
So, following the police appeals, a psychiatrist who had worked with Alexander Palmer then came forward with some concerns around previous things that Palmer had said.
The psychologist told the police that when treating Alexander Palmer, he had ideations of violent attacks, often with a knife.
Palmer had talked about his desire to attack random people. The voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Once Alexander Palmer was known to the inquiry, he was allocated to a team of detectives as a person of interest. Having obtained a photograph from Facebook, it was immediately apparent that there was a very strong likeness with the EFIT that had been provided by one of the dog walkers.
So at the time we knew that Palmer was 24 years old and he lived in Cringleford in Norfolk, and he had previously been a part of the armed forces.
Having identified Alexander Palmer as a suspect, an arrest strategy was prepared and he was arrested at 4:40 the following morning.
News of the arrest quickly spreads.
I wasn't sleeping. Quite paranoid about it all. I always kept looking at my iPad, to see if there'd been any updates. And I think there's one at 3 o'clock in the morning, the first published Alexander's name. So I quickly thought I'd have a look at Facebook. And lo and behold, there he was. As soon as I saw him on Facebook, I realised that was him. Without a shadow of a doubt.
After Alexander was arrested, they'd informed Anne, and Anne informed us that someone had been arrested for it, which was a relief for us.
As part of the arrest strategy, having been brought into custody, various forensic samples and a DNA swab will have been taken from Palmer which will have been fast-tracked to the laboratory to try to get a profile as soon as possible. Having an outstanding profile from Mr. Wrighton's trousers, they need to know as soon as possible whether there could be any link to Alexander Palmer.
With forensic evidence being processed, Palmer himself is brought in for questioning.
Alex, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Alexander Hobbs Palmer.
As I said, the EFIT was prepared from a description. Have a look at that. What would you say about that?
That's a pretty good likeness.
Alexander admitted that he had been in the area at the time.
During the first interview, Palmer revealed that he had been in the area. He said that he had travelled there and feeling depressed, he had stood there and had cried to himself and had walked about and then returned to his car, parked somewhere separately and had another walk and then left the area.
He was quite adamant about it, that he had not done it. He was not the killer. There was a Roman road that dissected the wood. Mr. Wrighton had been killed on the west side of the road. Alexander said that he'd been on the east side at all times. I found him to be pretty calm, composed. He was intelligent.
Despite Palmer's denials, on the ground, detectives worked tirelessly to find evidence to link him to the crime.
You're looking for something that will link him to the scene, something that will link him to Mr. Wrighton. So you're going to look for any clothes that have been worn at any locations that he's been to, so a house, look-up, work, vehicles that he may have used, looking to seize as many items as possible to initially assess them and then send them for forensic examination.
And it isn't long before forensic investigations start to produce results.
It was the second day of interviews that the positive result on the DNA matching Alexander Palmer to the DNA profile found on the trousers, probably where he dragged Mr. Wrighton into the bushes, grabbing his trousers to pull him along.
What could be his DNA was found on Mr. Wrighton's trousers, and what could have been Mr. Wrighton's blood was found on the collar of a jacket that belonged to Alexander.
That was the main evidence to link Alexander Palmer to Peter Wrighton, and obviously that then entered into the interview strategy.
Can you explain to me why your DNA is on that man?
I'm afraid I can't without knowing.
You don't need to know. It's irrelevant where it is. You say you haven't met him. Why is your DNA on him?
For instance, I could have lost a hair follicle and caught on his shoe. That's just me speculating, but without knowing, I couldn't venture a guess.
Okay.
Police now have a DNA link between the two men, but need further proof linking Palmer to the crime.
A search of his car identified a map which had markings on it indicating the area of the heath, which is obviously of interest because it indicates some sort of pre-planning before going to the scene.
There was ANPR data, the number plate recognition, which put Palmer at the location at the day of the murder.
Some ANPR evidence had been recovered with Palmer driving his car in the morning when dropping his partner off in the city, which showed him apparently in a white or light-coloured shirt, and when he was seen picking her up in the afternoon, he was seen in a dark-coloured shirt. And yet his account was that he had been wearing the same clothes all day, but he appeared to have changed his clothing, and none of that clothing, which is highly likely to have been heavily bloodstained, was ever recovered.
Police believe they have irrefutable proof that Palmer killed Peter Wrighton, but they still don't know why or what with. and their suspect is now refusing to talk.
I'll ask you again, were you involved in the murder of Peter Wright? No comment.
He made it very clear that he was not guilty, was not responsible, and he hadn't done the killing. And that remained his position throughout.
Detectives analyse Palmer's phone records and come across a damning photograph.
It was established that he had bought a hunting-type knife, and in fact there was a picture of it, I think, on his phone. That picture of the knife was shown to the forensic pathologist, who confirmed that it could have caused the injuries.
Alexander Palmer is charged with murder. But what was his motive? And what drove him to kill? February 2018. And Alexander Palmer is standing trial at Nottingham Crown Court, accused of murdering Peter Wrighton in August 2017. A crime which had sent shockwaves through the small, close-knit community of East Harling.
I think my first initial thought was, whoever done this is a coward. The nature of the frenzy that murderer did, it was a cowardly act on an old man who's out walking dogs.
Totally shocked. I couldn't believe it, because it's such a quiet and peaceful place. It just seemed incredible it could happen here. It just seemed impossible, really.
Prior to the court case, Palmer has to undergo psychological assessments to determine his capacity to stand trial.
I believe he was initially sent to Belmarsh Prison and then to Rampton for that assessment. And the question to be answered was Alexander Palmer mad or bad? Had he carried out this attack because of a mental illness that he was suffering from, or was he just a very violent and nasty person?
So who is Alexander Palmer?
When I first met Alexander, he was 24 years old. He'd been 23 at the time of the offence. He had no previous convictions, no cautions, no findings of guilt, no reprimands, nothing, so far as the police were concerned, that would suggest that he would commit such a violent offence. He'd served in the British Army till about 2015. He had trained and qualified as a commando, one of the few who actually qualified in his year. But there was one thing of note. In March of 2014, a fellow trainee had stamped on his head, and that was plainly the beginning of his mental problems. Because of that, he had been medically discharged from the army.
Throughout 2015, Palmer was treated as both an inpatient and an outpatient in mental health services, seen by several different psychologists. But one expressed concern to the police after seeing media appeals about the murder.
One of the people that contacted the control room was a psychologist who had worked previously with Palmer following an assault on Palmer whilst he was serving in the forces that had had an effect on him.
And one piece of information comes to light which is particularly chilling.
The psychologist told the police that he had a dislike for dog walkers.
Dog walkers, he said, were a particular bugbear of his.
He was obviously suffering some mental health problems brought on by PTSD. He had some kind of grievance with dog walkers is the thing that stands out.
He had made disclosures about ideations around violence and a dislike of dog walkers.
Having been deemed fit to stand trial, the court hears how Alex had revealed on arrest that he heard voices in his head.
Palmer had talked about the voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Is there a different Alex?
Times, yes.
Okay, who's he?
He used to manifest himself as a physical hallucination, but now he's just a voice.
Is he still with us?
Yes.
Is he here today?
Yes.
Where is he now?
What is him here?
He's there, is he?
Palmer admits being on the Heathlands on the day of the murder.
So was Alex there that day? The other Alex?
He's always there, so
He's always there, so he would have been with you, okay? Was he? Do you remember him talking to you on that day? You don't? But you say he talks to you every day?
Yes.
He's there laughing at you? But you say he doesn't tell you what to do? He doesn't force you to do things or anything like that?
Palmer, during the court case, had said that he had visited the woodland because he was feeling low, but didn't say that he'd been involved in the attack.
But the prosecution puts forward evidence linking Palmer to Peter Wrighton.
Several of Mr. Wrighton's clothes were sent for forensic examination, and they had identified DNA from a person on the leg of his trousers.
I believe there was DNA found on Mr. Wrighton as well, which linked Palmer to the murder.
The court also hears that on the morning of the murder, ANPR cameras picked up Palmer's black Ford Focus on the A11 heading towards the Heath. Mobile phone records reveal he is stationary on the area of the Heath from 10:19 a.m. for a period of 32 minutes and 55 seconds. His car is then picked up heading north on the A11. The whole journey, police believe, had been planned in advance.
A search of his car identified a map with the area marked out.
In fact, investigations reveal Palmer had completed the exact same journey 2 weeks prior to the murder. Had it been a practice run, or had he intended to kill on that day? Either way, it was Peter who found himself at the end of Palmer's wrath on that fateful day.
Why did you pick Peter?
Being that Peter's about my stature and a bit older than I am, Peter was easy prey for Alexander.
But did Peter actually try to help this man? We don't know. Nobody will ever know. Because this man won't say anything now. Did Peter try to help him and Peter suffered for it? We don't know.
It was also revealed that despite his age and smaller stature, Peter had tried to fight off his attacker.
He had what we would refer to as defensive marks on his hand. It would appear that he tried to grab the blade of the knife to stop his assailant.
It was unprovoked, and he was a very, very old man that couldn't defend himself. Alexander's quite a strong lad, you know, military background, very fit and able. Peter Wrighton could hardly stand up. I think very cowardly.
The prosecution reveal further evidence that Palmer had planned to kill. Police had found a notebook in a storage facility belonging to Palmer, in which it appeared he had written of his plans.
So in January of 2015, he said he was thinking of going for dog walkers. He said that he hated dog walkers and that if he did this, he would be up on a pedestal, up with the big ones. Everyone would look up to him. Everyone would know his name.
But while police did discover the notebook, there's one thing they never did find: the knife he used to kill Peter.
The prosecution case would be the steps that he had taken to get rid of any forensic evidence would indicate a knowledge of what he had done and an intention to cover up what he had done.
On the advice of his barrister, Palmer does not give evidence in his trial.
I explained to him that it's his case, his future, his liberty that's at stake, and that we act as a voice for him in the courtroom.
The notebook, DNA, witness statements, and the EFIT, as well as Palmer's medical records, are put to the court.
The prosecution case was a strong one. ANPR evidence in relation to his vehicle and cell site evidence in relation to his phone showed that he had been in the area at the relevant time. In addition to that, there was evidence from 2 eyewitnesses who had given descriptions of the person who was likely to have been Mr. Wrighton's attacker. And those descriptions were quite similar to the appearance of Alexander. One of those 2 witnesses had made an e-fit, and again, the e-fit was quite similar to Alexander's appearance. There was no direct evidence, but if you put all those matters together, it represents quite a strong case.
Having heard all the evidence, the jury retire to consider their verdict.
The trial came to a conclusion and the jury found Alexander Palmer guilty of murder.
When a jury decides after 49 minutes, I think there's obviously overwhelming evidence to suggest that Palmer was the person who carried out the murder. That was the one thing that stood out for me at the trial, is how quickly they decided that Palmer was guilty of the murder.
Despite evidence of Palmer's mental health problems, the judge ruled that he had meticulously planned the murder.
The statutory sentence is life imprisonment, but there is a recommendation from the judge, which in this case was 28 years. I would suggest that the fact that once convicted and imprisoned, he was sent to a normal prison rather than a psychiatric prison indicates that the assessment was that he was a violent and nasty person.
Good girl, good girl. Come on.
The dog walkers of East Harling will never forget the horrifying crime which leaves its mark on this close-knit community.
Not the same in the forest here for months. People were not relaxed, they're very nervous, looking over their shoulder all the time. I was doing the same, actually, looking over your shoulder, seeing what the cars were parked here. It was very bizarre, kind of chilling feeling afterwards.
And for Peter Bibby, his brush with evil will live with him forever.
It was quite a scary thing, and it's all the what ifs. What if I had gone back? You know, would have changed things. I was walking straight forward to him. It could have been me.
Investigate an infamous case stage by stage to appreciate the full picture in OJ Made in America, available now on Sky Documentaries.
I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
Didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world.
Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at the property.
News of a devastating fire in the Cheshire countryside.
Once those fires had died down, there was no sign of her.
Where is the owner, and are they safe? When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, clearly a murder from the off.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that.
Police believe she was murdered and then her home deliberately set alight.
In the middle of the Cheshire countryside lies a quiet, quaint hamlet. Cranage.
It's quite an affluent area in parts. There's some big houses. There's a lot of farms around there, quite isolated at parts, and dairy farms, chicken farms. As well as being quite small, there's obviously the classic community feel towards it, whereby everybody knows everyone, and that's pretty much central to a place like Cranage.
The area is a really desirable place to live. I mean, a lot of people with a lot of money want to come and share what we've got out here. You know, we've got quite a lot of famous footballers in the area.
It's a lovely area, and it's just a nice area to live.
In the heart of the village sits Parklands Cattery, run by popular local Diana Lee.
Diane was a lovely girl that would always help people out. Very, very conscientious, very bright. You never saw her without a smile on her face. She was always very bubbly and just a lovely person. I'd never heard anybody say a wrong word about her.
She was always such a lovely lady, very full of the joys of spring, and didn't seem to me like she's got any enemies in the world. You know, she's that type of really likeable person.
Originally from Tabley, Diana moved to Cranage in 2008 and opened her own cattery business. And it thrived.
Diana opened the business with an ex-partner at the property and been quite successful in doing so. That partner then left that business and she continued to run the cattery on her own.
But Parklands wasn't just any cattery. It was the creme de la creme of the feline world.
She loved cats, and that's why she created the business that she did do, which was probably a little bit unique to Cheshire and this environment. So offering TVs and beds, sort of prices that probably slightly higher than maybe other areas of the country. So yeah, I mean, that showed probably her caring side more than anything else.
I think anybody that wanted to trust anybody with their animal, you'd only have to be in the presence of Diane for a few minutes and you'd soon be contented the mind that your animal would be in safe hands and well looked after, well cared for, because she's just that caring nature.
Diana lived in a large gated detached property next door to her cattery, but she didn't live alone.
Being a big property at Parklands, Diana had a lodger who lived with her at that time, probably a bit of company and also to help with the income coming in and to upkeep such a large property and the business as well.
On the 8th of August 2012, Diana meets friends for dinner, something which she often does in her spare time.
Diana met up with some friends in Knutsford at the Manzan Chinese restaurant on King Street, where she spent the evening with them.
She got a lot of friends, Diane had, and she'd be out with different groups of friends quite a lot.
But little does Diana know, that evening with friends is to change life forever and leave a lasting scar on the close-knit community.
11 a.m, Cheshire Fire and Rescue received a call of multiple fires at a property in Cranage.
This scene was discovered through a family relative going to the address. They go to the house, they see fire coming from, smoke coming from the house and the garage. A neighbour was alerted who rang the fire brigade.
Emergency services arrive and work tirelessly to put out the fire.
Once those fires had died down and they'd been treated with, they'd realised that Diana's car wasn't at the property and there was no sign of her.
That's the main concern for the police, would be where is the owner and are they safe? The police have got a report of a fire. You've got a relative who's turned up who can't find the owner. Clearly there's a number of seats of fire. Straight away you'd be thinking there's something suspicious regarding this, particularly if you're looking at an affluent property like we've got here.
The fire experts are going to be looking at whether it's a deliberately set fire, whether it appears to be an electrical fire, whether it's potentially a chip pan that's gone over, and as soon as the idea that a fire has been deliberately set, everyone's mind goes into very suspicious.
Fire officers keep searching the property grounds and enter the adjacent garage. And what they find changes the course of the investigation.
They found her body at the property, and at that point, police were called to investigate.
When Diana's body was discovered, the most obvious thing that would be clear to the first attenders is that the body was, certainly on the surface, badly burnt. That raises a whole number of possible scenarios. An accident, misadventure.
Cheshire police immediately arrive at the scene.
In the time I've served in the police as an investigator, I've been involved with many inquiries. The early priorities are the scene, first scene where the victim is.
But it's where Diana's body is that raises suspicion. She is found lying face down on a wheelbarrow. She is naked, covered in shredded paper and bedding. Her body battered with horrific injuries.
When the deceased is found, clearly the state of the body, how it's been found, is clearly a murder from the off.
Police believe the extent of the injuries are not just caused by the fire, so a murder investigation is launched.
The most important thing is to preserve the scene. The slightest disturbance of a scene, by trampling through it, walking through it innocently, it causes contamination. So it's really, really important to make sure that it's cordoned off.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
News of the shocking crime spreads quickly through the close-knit community.
I can't believe anybody would treat Diane like that and do so much harm. It just seems horrendous. I just can't comprehend it.
In the quiet, quaint village of Cranage, the community is shocked at the news of a murder. But the previous evening, August 8th, started off like a normal night out for 54-year-old Diana Lee. At 8 p.m, Diana met up with friends and had dinner in a local Chinese restaurant. According to friends, she said goodbye to them at 10:15 p.m. before driving home. Early the following morning, Diana sent a text to a friend.
Diana's phone records on the morning of her death showed that she'd texted a friend saying she wasn't feeling very well, she's feeling sick, and that she'd like her to collect a cat later in the day.
But just a few hours later, her property was engulfed in flames.
Fire brigade and the police attend, and we find the horrible scene in the garage of the victim.
She was found dead in her home, and police had opened a murder investigation.
News of the horrific attack quickly spreads.
The call came through from a contact who had been driving past the area saying there was lots of activity in Cranage itself, so we decided to come down. When we came down here, there was essentially fire, pumps, as well as emergency services, police and ambulance as well. Whenever you have a scene of maybe 3 or 4 police vehicles and 4 fire engines, you know that something's pretty serious. The tape was quite high up. They'd sort of cordoned off here, and it was difficult to get any closer than this, really. But obviously, there's lots of residents coming down here, trying to find out what had been taking place.
And the quiet village of Cranage is now the centre of an atrocious crime, and fear spreads that there's a killer on the loose.
The feeling in the community was just of absolute shock, a disbelief that, things like murders don't happen around here.
I think from the outset, it was shock more than anything, and for it to happen for these residents on what is their doorstep was probably a big shock to them.
The fears for a community is who would do such an awful crime and they're still out there. Could they strike again?
There was a real lack of understanding of that somebody could do this.
The question crossing the community's mind: who could have murdered Diana, and why?
Certainly, any murder, there's rumour and speculation about the victim and the motive for a murder or who could have done it.
Some murders are spontaneous, a lot of it is finance. So you'd be looking at straight away what the lady does for a living. Is the money owed? Has it just been a random targeted attack by some local or someone travelling?
Police need to act fast, so they search the house. But they quickly come across a startling piece of evidence.
There was evidence of the victim's clothing in the lodger's bedroom and also a blood-stained knife which belonged to the lodger. So he's got access to the house, he's got access to the garage. He may have been in a relationship with this lady. So you've got to treat that individual as a suspect. You would have to arrest them.
With such obvious evidence potentially linking the lodger to the crime, police need to establish his movements in the hours Diana was last seen alive.
From their point of view, it's a case of trying to find out their background, where they were at the time of the incident, what they'd been up to, trying to find all sorts of reasons why they could have committed a crime such as this one.
The lodger tells detectives that he last saw Diana at 7:30 p.m. in the garden before she left in her car to have dinner with friends in Knutsford. He goes on to say that he left for work at 6 a.m. and remembers seeing Diana's car parked on the driveway. While police unpick the lodger's alibi to see if it stacks up, the team on the ground make a breakthrough discovery.
They found that Diana's car had been abandoned 10 miles away in Mobley. At that point, they'd also had reports from a taxi driver who had seen a man acting suspicious in the area, who'd also tried to torch the vehicle before running off.
A witness came forward, a taxi driver, to say that he'd seen someone trying to set fire to the car. He challenged the driver, and the driver made off on a bike, and then he's made off on fields. So again, the push bike would be a scene, and there'd be searches going around that area.
Was this man Diana's lodger? And had he driven Diana's car 10 miles north? But while police gather evidence, another arrest is made.
It was a person who was known to Diana, who'd been an ex-partner, who had been convicted previously of a charge against her. He had convictions against Diana in terms of beating her.
There were two immediate suspects, two men who were in her life. So there was a lodger, and there was some circumstantial evidence that suggested that he was not all he said he was. And then there was a very violent ex who had actually been imprisoned for attacking her. So two quite strong suspects.
But police are soon able to confirm Diana's lodger was at work the entire day from 6 a.m, hours before the fire had started. He is released without charge. And with the items of evidence found in his room, detectives now suspect the lodger was set up for murder. But by who? With Diana's ex still in custody, police take a more in-depth look at him and his whereabouts.
The large proportion of domestic murders is sometimes it's an ex-partner. Clearly the ex-partner was a prime suspect very early on. The motive is he knows the victim, it's previous violent history towards the victim, so straight away you'd be alarm bells going.
We were all pretty convinced who'd actually done this.
The local community recall Diana had once lived a life in fear from her ex.
Somebody that she'd known was banned from being in the area, and she knew that he'd been at the house. Certain things had moved, and she was petrified. And she gave me a call, and I went down to have a look to see if there was anybody there. I'd never seen anybody so petrified.
And the location of Diana's car further cements police suspicions. It was dumped between her house and that of her ex's.
The investigating officers realised that the car had been found in a location that was en route to the person, so it probably made sense in their minds that, again, he was the person who'd committed this crime.
Questioning of Diana's ex intensifies.
Is he still in contact? Where does he live? What were his movements for the day or the time of the murder, to eliminate them from the inquiry?
So after a couple of days of speaking to the person who they'd arrested, it quickly became apparent that that individual had a solid alibi.
With his whereabouts on the night of Diana's murder confirmed, her ex-partner is released. Having followed strong leads and had 2 potential suspects, detectives are back to square one.
It was a case whereby the police had to reappeal for information. It was a case of them having come across a bit of a dead end and having to start again to see who had committed this crime.
But post-mortem results come in and help police identify the cause of her death. Could this provide further clues to her attacker?
If somebody has died before a fire, then you will sometimes see soot in the mouth, you will sometimes see it as far as the larynx. But to get it down into the lungs, somebody has to be breathing. Answer that vital question, was this person alive when the fire was burning? And you'll be seeing that she hasn't inhaled soot. She hasn't inhaled the products of combustion. All of this is pointing to her being dead and then set alight, rather than either a deliberate act by herself or some sort of strange accident with solvents. She died of head injuries, so there was clear evidence of bleeding in the head resulting from impacts. That is very different to what you see if there's simply damage to the head from it being heated in a fire.
Police now know Diana died before her lifeless body was dumped and the garage set alight, meaning the killer tried to cover his tracks.
DNA will be damaged by the heat that the fire produces, but certainly trace evidence, if one looks hard enough, it can be recovered.
Forensics locate a small amount of unknown DNA on Diana. And there's something else.
There's no self-defense wounds. That information from the pathologist would clearly indicate generally that she knew the person was there with consent in the property, and that they weren't expecting that trauma to be caused to them.
Detectives now believe Diana's killer was known to her, so need to delve into her private life and turn to the community for help.
Community's key to any murder inquiry because they're the eyes and ears, and they probably hold evidence what they don't know at the time.
I get the feeling, as you do in so many of these cases, that Diana was actually quite a vulnerable person. She was living alone. She was probably fairly happy, having come out of an abusive and violent relationship. She was building things up again.
Maybe the situation has arose where she was probably too trusting of somebody.
Friends express their concerns that perhaps all was not as it seemed in Diana's life.
I should imagine she was easily taken advantage of in a financial way because she was quite a wealthy lady. A few times when I saw her passing, she seemed like very troubled, as though she wasn't her usual self, and she was obviously hiding something that she was really concerned about, but she never really told me the full extent of it, and that was a bit of a worry for me, you know, what was going on with her. But I think most people would have realised something was not quite right, but because she was a private person, she didn't really explain to me exactly what was going on. And I just said to her, if you ever have any problems, you must report things if there's something you need to report. But she wouldn't tell me anything in detail or anything.
With those close to Diana unable to shed light on her private life, the investigation intensifies and police expand their search, trawling through local businesses and residential CCTV on the night Diana was last seen alive.
CCTV is huge on any major incident and murder inquiry, whether it's from the local council's CCTV, the police ANPR cameras, and then people's own CCTV from shops, businesses and private CCTV. A lot of the houses in this area will have their own CCTV. And if you get a fleeting glance of a vehicle or a person, that is key to an inquiry to identify people who have been at the scene.
So for the police officers investigating this case, they had a bit of a break when they found the CCTV footage on King Street of Diana leaving the restaurant, but at the same time they were left slightly puzzled by her movements, which were caught on an ANPR camera, which saw her headed away from her home address in Cranage and towards the Altrincham area of Greater Manchester.
What the police couldn't account for is about 45 minutes in between her leaving her friends and arriving home. So that gap in time was something that the police really needed to find out. Where was she going? Who was she seeing? Who was she meeting? That 45 minutes for the police would have been absolutely crucial because nobody could explain where she'd gone. So there was something in Diana's life that the police didn't know about.
With this latest piece of information, police looked closely at Diana's phone records and noticed something suspicious.
So as the officers trawled through Diana's phone records, they found a number that she'd been communicating with on a regular occurrence, but had stopped doing so in January of that year.
Is another suspect in their sights?
That number belonged to a David Ryan, who lived in Hale in Greater Manchester.
It's been several weeks since local Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. Police have questioned and released 2 men known to Diana, and 13 days after her body was discovered, police release an e-fit.
The police issued an e-fit of someone who they wanted to speak to. That individual was a person who was with the Corsa, which was seen trying to set fire to it and then made off on a push bike. It's really important that people try and recall what they were doing that day at that time, because they may have seen that offender leaving the scene.
With officers waiting for tip-offs from members of the public following the release of the e-fit, and having eliminated 2 suspects that are known to Diana, detectives have also been trawling through Diana's phone and have traced a mysterious phone number. Could this be a 3rd suspect? And who is this David Ryan? And how is he connected to Diana?
So as part of the police investigation, the officers went to David Ryan's house in Hale in Greater Manchester. They asked him how he knew Diana. He said in 2010 he had met her at a dancing club in nearby Bowden. He said that he had not met her since, and that was the only occasion when he had seen her.
He gives an account that he knew the lady, not well, but he knew her. He met her about 2 years ago at a local dance club, and that was it really, nothing intimate, that he just knew her as a fleeting acquaintance, and that's all he gave to the police.
At this point, officers took a DNA swab of his mouth just to eliminate him from their inquiries.
Despite this latest lead, police still have no suspect. So detectives start looking deeper into Diana's digital footprint.
One of the things they looked at was her financial transactions, and it was noted there were large sums of money missing or that couldn't be traced.
And officers at Cheshire Police found a substantial amount of money that had been withdrawn by Diana, I think circa £60,000, whereby they had no idea where that money had gone. Straight away, that gave them the lead in terms of trying to find out who that money had gone to.
The large withdrawals ring alarm bells for detectives, and there is no sign of where or who the money was transferred to. But with the investigation intensifying, Suddenly, police make an announcement.
A 47-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the murder of a Cranage businesswoman.
As the inquiry progressed on the 2nd of September, the police announced to the media that they've arrested a suspect for the murder of Diana Lee.
The man who's arrested is David Ryan, the man who Diana met at the dancing club in Bowden first in 2010.
It was a bit of a shock to us all, really.
It had only been 24 hours since David told detectives he had met Diana once. So how had he ended up in police custody?
The day after Mr. Ryan had been spoken to by the police and given his DNA sample, he called the police and said that he had further information, that he did know the victim, that he'd met the victim the night before the murder, and he'd had consensual sex in her car with him. So Mr. Ryan said that he was in a relationship with this lady. He'd been for some time. He'd done work at the house. He had a conservatory window glazing company that he'd done a lot of work at the house.
But why would David change his alibi?
There are lots of reasons why somebody would keep a relationship secret. One of the reasons is that that person is in a marriage. Things need to be kept quiet.
Clearly his mind had been worrying about the DNA, that they'd taken the DNA sample and that he would be linked to the victims. So what he's done is he's tried to say that we would find his DNA once it had been examined, that he'd had sex with the day before, that he knew her and he had sex with in the car. But it doesn't automatically say that he's murdered her, but his DNA would be found on her.
Detectives acknowledge David's concern that his DNA would most likely be picked up on Diana from the night before. But they still need to rule him out as a suspect.
So the police will be doing a lot of work around this new suspect whilst he's in custody, of his background. The background showed that he was a failed businessman. He spent lots of money. He liked spending money. He was buying stuff, exotic items for himself, for his family. And that shows the sort of mentality of the individual. And then that clearly links to the problems. Financially, he was bankrupt, business-wise.
They found he was in a huge amount of debt. His business, which was a window and door conservatory business, had collapsed in June 2012. It was quite clear that he was struggling for money.
David's money issues raised suspicion. On one hand, he was bankrupt. On the other, he was spending large amounts. And he'd been in a secret relationship with Diana, whose own bank accounts recently showed large amounts of money vanishing.
Throughout that, there was instances of spending which didn't tally with what he had.
So you're building the picture of someone who's will probably go to any means to try and support himself financially, not do the basics in life of working hard and getting money, but to get it quickly.
Intense investigations into both Diana and David's financial transactions ensue, and it isn't long before a link is made.
The next stage was finding out that David Ryan had basically tricked Diana into investing tens of thousands of pounds of her own money into companies that just didn't exist. This has gone on for a period of time, and Diana had committed a large amount of money into these fake schemes.
Clearly, the victim was vulnerable in some respects, struck up a relationship with the offender. He would have thought probably she was a wealthy lady, she had money, he was in financial troubles, his business was going downhill, he owed money out, and she was probably a target for Mr. Ryan to take advantage of financially.
Forensic evidence is then uncovered, which appears to place David at the scene of the crime.
There was a footprint found at the scene of the murder in the victim's blood, so that would suggest and confirm that whoever was wearing that footwear was at the scene after the victim had been killed. And that footwear was the offender's footwear, Mr. Ryan, and the forensic evidence supported the fact that it was his footwear and couldn't have been no one else's.
And it appears David Ryan has been following the case closely.
computer analysis of his computers at his house and his phone, and it was quite compelling evidence, circumstantially, that he'd been searching on Cheshire Police website about the murder, where the inquiry was up to.
Perhaps even aware time was running out.
Background checks by officers into Ryan's computer's history found that he'd searched for countries that had no extradition treaties with the UK.
Somalia was named, and a number of others. So clearly this is a man who wants to, or is thinking about leaving the country because he's done something wrong. This man is now trying a way out to disappear from the country, to get away from being arrested for this awful murder.
Police appear to have finally found their man. And by collating all their information on David, they pieced together a timeline of a murder.
Diana had obviously left the Man's End restaurant in King Street in Knutsford.
And they know that her car was caught by the ANPR cameras driving away from her home.
From there, she'd gone to Hale in Manchester to see David Ryan in her car. She picked him up. They travelled back down to Cranage, whereby they spent the night. And then, obviously, in the early hours of the morning, for whatever happened and whatever reasons, Diana was murdered.
Having killed the person he's been having an affair with for almost 2 years, David then sets a scene.
So following the murder, Mr. Ryan decided to cover his tracks, planting evidence in the lodger's room, using a dagger, leaving it there that he'd used to commit the crime. He'd also then started to plant various fires around the house.
He tried to burn the body to try and get rid of forensic evidence.
The problem being that he found that where he'd started those fires, there wasn't enough oxygen for the fires to let hold. The fires just burnt themselves out, so they didn't have the effect that he wanted to. His plan, quite clearly, was to destroy the whole property, to make sure nothing was left, to make sure no evidence was left behind, so nothing could be traced back to him.
This was all about him getting away with it. This is about him walking away and leaving whatever behind him. This wasn't about anger. This wasn't about passion. This was, how do I get out of this? And can you imagine using that amount of violence just to get out of something?
The police had sufficient evidence to go to the CPS to charge Mr. Ryan with murder.
But what really went on that fateful morning? And what may have driven David to murder Diana?
The trial of a man from the Altrincham area accused of killing a Cranage businesswoman has begun. Diana Lee, who was 54, was found dead after a fire at her home last August.
It's been 10 months since Diana Lee was found murdered in her home in Cranage. And 48-year-old David Ryan faces trial for her murder at Chester Crown Court.
Heading into the trial for this crime, I would clearly be concerned of all the evidence we've got. Have we got sufficient evidence to convict him beyond all reasonable doubt for a jury to believe the prosecution case and it's watertight? The last thing you want to do is go to a trial and there be some error or some process we haven't done. The continuity evidence has been missed somewhere and it be brought up at a Crown Court trial.
Local reporter James Wilson recalls seeing Diana's killer in the flesh.
On the first day of the trial, it was a bit of a surprise to myself to see Mr. Ryan stood there. He probably wasn't what you would describe as a person who probably capable of committing this crime, essentially. He wasn't very big, looked quite meek, and he was obviously incredibly nervous as the proceedings were about to begin.
The prosecution begins by setting out its case to the jury.
The prosecution outlined a really strong case in their opening statement. They detailed where the DNA had been found in the property, including the bedroom and other parts of the house. Quite a lot was backed up by phone records and evidence of the ANPR cameras around the area. It was an incredibly strong case and probably quite surprising that Mr. Ryan at this point was still pleading not guilty.
The prosecution reveals to the court how David first responded to police.
I think police officers were quite taken aback by Ryan's reaction to the request for a DNA swab. He wasn't happy. He became quite agitated, and he suggested he didn't want to do it. It was only after persuasion by the officers involved that mouth swab was completed.
The prosecution reveals further evidence in relation to a text Diana sent.
The police searched details on her mobile phone records. They found out that text messages had been sent in the morning to her close friends, saying she'd been unwell.
A simple text message, but one which immediately flags suspicion among investigators. The text was sent early on the morning of 9th of August, when Diana was already dead.
An expert gave evidence at the trial to say that was unlikely to be the victim's text message by the language used in the text message. So sometimes we will use different experts in certain fields, and this expert would say that it wasn't the normal language used by the victim, but more likely to be used by the offender.
A linguistics expert tells the court that the style of the text message did not match Diana's typical style, but it did match David Ryan's. Despite hearing evidence linking David Ryan to the murder, the court hears he has no previous convictions. So what would lead him to commit such an atrocious crime? But as the trial unfolds, more information comes to light, hinting at a potential motive.
Obviously, living in Hale, it's a very affluent suburb of Greater Manchester. Maybe from his point of view, there was a pressure to keep that up. Maybe there was a pressure to keep up that pretense that he just couldn't do anymore.
This man was in financial dire straits. Now, that is one of the triggers that can cause big problems in a relationship. He may have feared that his wife was going to leave him because of these enormous debts. He may have gone out and looked for someone like Diana to be able to get some money to fix the other situation. I think he targeted Diana for money, and the reason I think that is because he spent all the money on his wife. He spent all the money on IVF treatments, on holidays, on things for his other family. He did not get invested in his relationship with Diana. So, no, I don't think he was in love with her.
He'd already taken a substantial amount of money from Diana on the premise of investing in things that just didn't exist.
But as it transpired, the deeper he got in, that was actually becoming a bigger threat to the other situation than perhaps even the finances were in the beginning.
Somewhere along the line, this man is living a lie. He's married, he's got a child, he's been in another relationship with someone secretly, and unfortunately, all these things come to an end somewhere along the line. And in these circumstances, I would have thought in relation to the victim, she's gone to his house the night before the murder. She's collected him in her car, brought her back to her house.
Diana started asking questions about the investment. You know, the money that she'd given him, where was it? How was it doing? Was she going to get any back? She wasn't a rich woman. She couldn't just chuck this money away and think, oh, well, you win some, you lose some. And I think that he was under increasing pressure from her.
She was going to possibly tell someone, tell their wife, or go to the police to say, he's targeted me.
So was David trying to protect his wife from finding out about his affair and his conning Diana out of money?
And there's a stage where there's a trigger. He was more worried about his wife finding out and her maybe leaving him. He wants to protect the relationship with his wife, but we can't simplistically say that that is because he's so in love with his wife. It is far more likely that he gets his entire identity from the relationship he has with his wife. And if you took that away from him, you'd be taking everything.
After a grueling 7-week trial at Chester Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. David Ryan is found guilty of Diana Lee's murder.
Conman David Ryan killed his wealthy lover after cheating her out of £60,000. Today, a jury in Chester found him guilty of murder.
He is sentenced to 34 years in prison.
There were shouts from the gallery from people connected to Diana who were obviously incredibly emotional at that time, hearing what they wanted to hear. Mr. Ryan was again pretty much motionless throughout this reading. There was no real reaction from him. I think probably he expected this verdict to come out, and again, he probably wasn't surprised deep down because he knew that he'd done this incredibly bad crime.
I think the most awful thing about this case is how dispensable Diana was to him. We all know she's a really, really lovely person. There's the lodger, who he doesn't know very well, but he's quite happy for both of those people to take the fall to protect his life. He has no empathy with their suffering or what's going to happen to them.
With David now behind bars, the local community look back and think why Diana, a successful and popular business owner, might have let a criminal into her life.
Diana didn't behave strangely when she gave the money to Ryan. She behaved in a way that any of us would have behaved in similar circumstances with the same information. She didn't hand over money to a person who she thought was dodgy or that she didn't like. She was taken in by him. She may have been lonely. She cared about him. She trusted him. We give money to people we trust. She wasn't a stupid woman. In hindsight, or from where we're sitting, we can say, I would never have done that. Well, I guarantee you, if you felt the way that she did, you might well have done.
It's just worrying, really, what can happen to you. And obviously happened to Diana, which is such a shame, because she was such a lovely lady.
Still in everybody's minds, still can't believe what's happened. It's just a tragedy.
For the residents of Cranage, she will never be forgotten.
We're Kent-bound as the experts fight an unseen enemy. Follow the action right from the beginning as new Cobra Cyber War starts. Thursday at 9.
It's an emergency. I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. I'm completely dead.
It was fairly obvious this was going to be a big story.
We spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run.
That type of thing doesn't happen around here.
Why was this little old lady killed?
This is a murder.
Nestled beside the River Itchen sits the pretty hamlet of Brambridge.
Brambridge is typical of these tiny little hamlets that have got very, very few homes there. Everyone really knows everyone. It's a very friendly kind of place, and you've got your little store, and all community life is around those areas. It attracts a lot of visitors simply because of the River Itchen. There are lovely walks along the river there. Again, one of the most beautiful spots in England. Brambridge is most definitely one of the loveliest.
This picturesque part of Hampshire often attracts a slower pace of life.
It was always predominantly sort of an elder generation place, so people around here were sort of over 50s, 60s.
The community is an aged community. It's not an awful lot of very young people. There are some young people, of course, homes with kids and so on, but the majority of the community is older people.
The Hampshire Hogs, as they're known, they're very proud of their area. The local people who have been here for generations. And, yeah, like everywhere where it's village life, it's lovely.
At the very edge of Brambridge lived a wealthy 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds.
Everything that was said about Georgina Edmonds was just a lovely, lovely lady. Well-liked and loved by everyone that knew her, very close to her family, very friendly, and just a charming old lady.
She had grandchildren that she really enjoyed playing with, was always up for a bit of a laugh. Her grandson was a budding filmmaker, and he would make funny little videos at Christmas, and Georgina would star in those as well. And she enjoyed life. You know, she was still very independent. She was still mobile. She drove her car. She would go down to the shops, but she had assistance with that as well.
Well, I knew her because one of the jobs I did at work was, to take the groceries to the dear old souls who couldn't get around. I know she always had her little dogs with her. Rather sweet little things. Very, very friendly. They used to stand up at the window and look out of the window. She was a delightful person, and nothing to say about her that wasn't nice.
Georgina lived in a large gated estate on the edge of the river.
The Edmonds family were well known in the area. It was Georgina's husband who had founded the family business importing coffee.
Very well-to-do family. Harry, her son, worked in London. The business, I believe, was in Basingstoke. But again, most of the time they were up in London working hard and would come back to Hampshire at weekends, for rest.
When Georgina's husband sadly passed away, she downsized into the smaller house on the estate.
She moved into the cottage, which is your chocolate box cover cottage itself.
Nice little house, amongst the trees, by the river.
Her son, Harry, took over running the business and moved into the larger house, as you would when you reach an older age. You don't want the bother of all the dusting.
Georgina seemed happy in her new home. But in January 2008, life in the community changes forever.
Police emergency.
This is an emergency. I've just come down to my house. My mother has a cottage 100 yards away.
Right.
I've got no reply from her. I've come in through her bedroom window, which was unlocked. She's lying on the floor in the kitchen, and it looks to me as if she's been hit over the head. She looks as if she's dead.
Okay, calm down for me, sir. What's your name?
My name is Harry Edmonds. I'm her son. I've just walked in. I came in through the window, and I found the house in complete darkness. I've gone through into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there, and I've been out walking her dogs. This looks like a crime scene to me.
Okay, well, try not to touch anything for me.
This is a murder.
Okay, just calm down for me, sir. I'll send someone else for you, okay?
Yeah, please, as soon as possible. I'm sick, she's dead. That's a murder.
It was about 6:15. I was at home, just prepping dinner, and my phone rang, and so I answered the phone, and they said, we've got a suspicious death. I said, okay, tell me about that. And they said, it's an elderly woman been found dead in the kitchen, face down by her son. So I jumped in the car, and it was a miserable, wet, cold January night, blowing a gale, driving through these country roads as we are now.
Paul Barton, Detective Chief Inspector at the time, arrives at Georgina's address, which is already swarmed with a significant police presence.
So just as I'm pulling down here, I can see the blue lights sort of flashing in the pitch black. So I know I'm getting close to it. And then I just come around the bend, and there's some more police activity. A police van and a police car, an ambulance, and some tape here, just across the bridge here. So I just pull in where I'm pulling in now, actually. I walked up the drive. It's a short walk up a gravel drive into the cottage. The kitchen door is on the side of the cottage. I just looked in, I could see, sadly, Georgina was lying there face down with a large amount of blood around her, some stab wounds to her neck. So I was satisfied at that point that we did have something that was a suspicious death.
A murder investigation is launched, and police maintain a secure perimeter in and around Georgina's home.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
I actually want this road completely closed. And it's one entrance in, one entrance out, but I didn't want anyone else coming across in. I certainly didn't want the press turning up and having a look. And so immediately what we call a wider cordon was put on, and we blocked the road so that we had complete control of the area.
That morning, we went out for a walk, and as we crossed the road where it leads to her house, there was a policeman standing there. There was a car, the road was blocked. And I said, "Can you tell me what's happening on this road? There's been a murder."
When the news broke, it was fairly obvious from the beginning that this was going to be a big story. Neighbours would phone the newsroom and say, "Can you tell us anything about what's going on?"
Everybody was talking about it, wherever you went, everybody in all the shops. And there were police everywhere, and you just wouldn't generally see police presence in that area.
The 15 years that we've been here, we haven't seen or we haven't heard of a murder, except for this one. This is the first one.
I think that was quite worrying because, why? Why was this little old lady killed? What was the reason? So it just seemed very, very random and horrible.
It became very obvious very quickly that this was a murder hunt that was out of the ordinary, shall we say.
So what led to a murder in this peaceful village? And why would someone want to kill a well-loved member of the community?
Police emergency.
It's an emergency. I've just walked into the kitchen and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
In the picturesque village of Brambridge, the close-knit community has woken up to the news that a much-loved 77-year-old grandmother, Georgina Edmonds, has been brutally murdered in her home.
It's extremely grim. My mum was 77 at the time and living with us, not very far away. So, yeah, you don't even want to think about it.
It's gone from being a quiet village scenario to then being sort of on the local news, everybody talking about it, what's happened, that type of thing doesn't happen around here.
With a small community in fear of a killer in their midst, it's down to DCI Paul Barton to address the public.
A Saturday morning I was doing my first media briefing, and it was packed, and it was Sky News Live, BBC Live, it was headline news, it was Midsummer Murders, kind of 77-year-old lady murdered brutally. So the nation were interested and the media were interested.
Under a national media spotlight, Hampshire police are under pressure to work out who would kill Georgina Edmonds and why.
I just start sort of kicking into autopilot. The next thing I'm thinking is, well, who's done this? Who's responsible? Any suspicious incident calls in that area in the last 24 hours? Has the victim been a victim of any other crimes? Is there any sort of domestic violence within the household? What do we know about the rest of the family? What do we know about the neighbours?
Was this a stranger murder? Was this someone, though, that she knew? And in such a small village, how did they get in and out of the cottage without being seen?
With a killer on the loose, the finger of suspicion is on every member of the community.
Everybody asking questions. We had so many people come in the pub at the time. You know, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Do you know who it was? You know.
We go out as the media and knock on doors and try to talk to people and find people that would have known her. When you've only got 5 homes to actually knock on the door, the community, they'll be in shock themselves, actually, about it.
With Georgina's son, Harry, too distraught to speak, it was left to neighbours to speculate what had happened. Had someone targeted her because of her wealth?
They had a beautiful house, they had quite a bit of money in the family. I just remember that, you know, the money, the big house, the jewellery. It was in a dark, secluded area.
There was nothing else there. There was another house, I think, to the right, I seem to remember. But that's it. She was on her own.
Police conduct a thorough search of Georgina's house for clues.
We were exploring what could have happened. Was it burglary that was the motive? Her credit card had been taken. I believe also a Radley handbag was gone. I think a laptop was gone. But there were other items that were there in the kitchen that were quite valuable. There was monies out, I believe, that were just left. And that seemed rather strange, that this was a burglary that had gone wrong, that the burglar hadn't taken those fairly obvious items that were there.
Police take a closer look at the crime scene, and one significant thing jumps out. There's no sign of a forced entry.
Was this a cover-up? Was it another motive? And so, therefore, had she been targeted in some other way, and it was a pretend burglary, taking just a few things, when a real burglar would have taken lots of things.
With no sign of a break-in, everyone known to Georgina is under suspicion. Could the local community offer clues as to who Georgina may have let into the house?
Trusting, you couldn't have had anyone more trusting. She was that sort of person. She never disputed things, you know, she just trusted people. And sometimes people are a bit suspicious, but she wasn't that type of person.
She was the sort of person, and I guess this is of her age, that would keep her door unlocked. You know, she would talk to strangers. If someone knocked on the door and asked for directions, she wouldn't be suspicious. Probably even offer them a cup of tea and, you know, spend time with people.
With no obvious break-in, detectives are left to speculate whether this was a random attack by a stranger or by someone closer to home.
Quite often, the last person to see the person alive could be the killer. It is odd that a son comes home and finds their mum dead in a kitchen. I've dealt with other jobs where children have killed parents. You know, they may have been off their face on drink or drugs. There may have been a domestic argument that's then gone too far. He could have had an axe to grind with his mother, and he could have killed his mother, and then he's just made up that he's come in and found her dead.
Police reanalyse the 999 call made by Georgina's son, Harry.
I've just walked in and found my mother's body lying there. This looks like a crime scene to me. This is a murder.
It's a strange call, I have to say. He's very calm, but he says she's dead. I think it's a murder, he says. And I remember, you know, we played that time and time again, and it's gone out in the media as well. And, you know, a lot of people thought that was strange.
Police bring Harry in for questioning to establish his movements in the hours his mother was murdered. He tells detectives he was at work all day and did not return home till 6 p.m.
He was concerned because he hadn't heard from his mother all day, and I think he'd been trying to call her. And he went to the cottage and it was in darkness. Harry's managed to force open the ground floor window, I think into Georgina's bedroom. He climbs in, goes into the kitchen and finds Georgina lifeless on the floor in a pool of blood.
Harry's story is quickly verified. Police are still no closer to establishing who had gained access to Georgina's home. So they release CCTV footage of Georgina the day before her death, which shows her holding a handbag, which is now missing, and urge the public for help.
To be honest, most people were pretty appalled anyway. just the fact that an old lady had been murdered without knowing the detail. And generally, everyone was trying to be as helpful as they possibly could.
It was a huge community thing, and they had big things in the village hall. So everyone got together, they all went out searching. Everybody was sort of part of it. Everybody searched, everyone went and looked, and yeah, all together really as a community.
Despite the community's best efforts, Georgina's handbag isn't found. But post-mortem results help police identify the cause of death. Could this lead to clues as to her attacker?
On one level, the death of Georgina Edmonds pathologically is straightforward. She has been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object. Ultimately, it was identified that that was a marble rolling pin. A heavy weapon, a good sort of thing to use to cause damage. But on top of that, you then have the incised wounds, the cuts to the body, inflicted with a degree of deliberation, and you don't really have defensive type injuries. One conclusion that could reasonably be drawn is that if they're not in a place where they are likely to kill you, that they are an act of torture. There is an attempt to distress somebody and extract information.
Police now believe Georgina was tortured before she died.
It was horrific, terrible. And as more details came out about what the guy had done to her, apparently tortured her, I mean, it got worse and worse.
Eventually, it emerged just the horrible scale of the injuries to Georgina that were allied to trying to find out her PIN number for her credit card.
We established about 5 hours after discovering her body that somebody had attempted to use that Cashpoint card at a local ATM. And we feel that they were trying to get the PIN number out of Georgina.
Police trace CCTV from that local Tesco ATM in nearby Eastleigh, only half a mile away from the murder scene, and see someone attempting to take money out.
They attempted to use the machine a couple of times. I think it swallowed up the card and off it went. So we didn't have a facial image of the person using the ATM machine, but we were confident to say it was a man. And in particular, the user of the ATM machine was wearing a thick fluorescent jacket with a hood up. And the person that approached that clearly knew that that camera was there because they took all reasonable steps to avoid being seen, keeping their head down, keeping the hood up, etc.
Despite his face being hidden, detectives now have an image of Georgina's killer, and the search for this person intensifies.
This is probably someone who was local or had local connections with Eastleigh. Have we had any offenders that have been released from prison recently in that area on licence? Have we got any registered sex offenders or violent offenders that are in that area? Luckily for me, the duty detective sergeant happened to know that there was a bail hostel called Elderfield House, which was pretty much at the end of the road from Brambridge leading into Otterbourne Village. It's the sort of place that you wouldn't expect to find in an affluent village like Otterbourne or Brambridge, and there are some unpleasant people there.
Behind those trees is Elderfield.
You can just see the rooftop over there.
These are people that had done time in prison, and after their term was over, they've sent them here.
It was a halfway house, basically.
It's a halfway house.
It was somewhere where they could sort of spend time and sort of rehabilitate and get back into normal life. And they would hang around in groups and get very drunk. And it was not nice. It was quite a bit unsettling.
It is of some concern in that you don't know what's going to happen next.
You would often get some of them escape, or they would then get out and they aren't supposed to be out. Danger, I guess it was described as.
Police question the residents of Elderfield to establish their movements on the night of Georgina's murder.
There were 4 people that were unaccounted for that night. I think 3 had come back late. Within 24 hours or so, we declared 4 people as suspects from Elderfield House. And we arrested them, searched their rooms, brought them back to the police station, forensically examined them, and then put them through the interview process.
After hours of questioning, it soon becomes clear to detectives that 3 of the suspects had clear alibis and are released without charge. But the 4th did not return to Elderfield for 24 hours during the night Georgina was murdered. And his clothing is of particular interest to police.
CCTV showed this fluorescent jacket, which was really key. And in our search in Elderfield House, we established that one of the residents who was unaccounted for on the night was wearing a big fluorescent jacket. He had previous convictions for murder or manslaughter. And so he was of particular interest and excitement to the team at that time.
But police are able to verify the 4th man's alibi, and he is released without charge. And with no suspect or clear motive, fear begins to escalate across the local community.
It's unsettling. It's unknown because the police don't tell you exactly what's happening, especially when they say, well, we haven't found him yet, we're still looking out for him, So where is he?
It was quite scary. My family were saying to me, don't go out on your own at night, don't go out to the car park on your own. Definitely makes you change the way you behave, the way you think. For ages, people didn't go to the garden centre. That was really affected by the whole situation, because I just think people thought it was a dangerous area to go to, so they didn't go there.
They were getting more and more concerned and worried that this is someone still here then, is it? Are we to believe that this is a stranger or someone that was passing through, just happened to pick the cottage, just happened to find that the door was open, going there, carry out this terrible crime, and then just drive away and leave the area utterly and completely, and that's it? Or is it more likely that the perpetrator is still here amongst us?
It's been 1 month since much-loved grandma, Georgina Edmonds, was found murdered in her home in Brambridge, and police are yet to charge anyone for the heinous crime.
It was in the media daily, you know, any newspaper stat you saw it was on the news, it was on the radio. We had boards up everywhere, and if you lived in the area as well, you couldn't miss it. Everyone knew what was going on.
I think at the time there was an urgency to get this one done, to get it sorted.
The only sighting detectives have is by a Tesco ATM machine in nearby Eastleigh. And so the investigation to find this man spotted on CCTV escalates.
We knew that Georgina's card had been attempted to be used. Then obviously that, for me, becomes an area of concentration for house to house. So we had police patrols in the area, certainly at the Tesco Express. We wanted to capture anyone that was there at the material time. So we obviously pulled the CCTV from the petrol station itself. We could read all the registration numbers of the cars coming in. And then we had the obvious houses sort of adjacent to Tesco Express and then right opposite. And so I decided that we would focus house to house in that area as well, knocking on doors. Again, good old-fashioned detective work.
And it isn't long before one address catches police attention.
There was a raid on a house that wasn't far from where the cash point had been, where the person in the frame had been using the debit card.
There was a particular address not a million miles away from the ATM machine where a man lived up until the point of around about the 11th of January and then disappeared. The inquiries that we did identified that he was Polish and had gone back to Poland. And he may have also had some previous convictions, so I sent the team out to Poland.
Suddenly, the news story goes international.
We had reports that the police had actually gone out to Poland to carry out inquiries.
There was a lot of media interest in this particular case, and then the media were descending on us, and they would put 2 and 2 together and come up with murderer fled to Poland and all this. You know, got the community kind of excited, if you like, because they were thinking, oh, great, they finally caught that person.
Police question the Polish man regarding his movements on the night Georgina was murdered. Have they finally found their killer?
He was alibied, and also I think through DNA as well, we were able to eliminate him from the inquiry.
With the Polish man in the clear, Hampshire police are back in the UK and back to square one. So they release a clearer version of the CCTV footage to the public and suspect the person is a male aged between 16 and 60 with an estimated height of 5'11". The hunt for this man accelerates to new levels.
We wanted DNA swabs from males matching that description to come forward. Our view was, if you've got nothing to hide, come forward.
You can't force people to do that kind of thing. But what this did, of course, was to add to the suspicion in the community. But they would have come forward because feeling, well, if I don't, then suspicion's going to fall on me. I must admit that, in my experience, I've never come across a mass DNA appeal anywhere that I've worked before. It was certainly turning into something that's, well, a modern-day thriller.
More than 2,000 local men have their DNA swabbed, but there are no immediate results, and the case goes cold. Two and a half years later, and Georgina's killer is still at large. But on the 30th of June, 2010, things take a dramatic turn. An arrest is made. And it's a local man. 31-year-old Matthew Hamlin.
We scrambled to find out who this man is. He's got a history of violence, and you know, he's not a nice guy to know.
Matthew Hamlin was known to police. He'd been known for drug usage and also violence in the past. He had a off-on relationship with a local girl. In fact, he'd had an argument with her and resulted hitting her with an ironing board, and she moved out of the home. He had quite a bad drug habit at that time, using cocaine, and we understand he also racked up numerous debts as a result of his drug usage. And so that kind of fitted the profile of somebody high on drugs, desperate, and probably not really thinking what they're doing.
You can understand that the police would be interested in him. He used to walk his dog along the riverbank there and would know the area quite well. So he fitted in one of the profiles, shall we say, for the police.
But what exactly led to Matthew's arrest?
One particularly interesting subject came to them with a couple of bits of evidence. The first was that despite he denying that he had been in the area on that particular day and time, his phone records were showing that he actually was there.
This person had a mobile phone, and what we could show was that their phone was bouncing off the same cell mast on the afternoon of the 11th of January.
With Hamlin in custody, police waste no time in recording his every word when his mum visits.
The other thing is I might have an alibi for it as well.
What do you mean?
When they first interviewed me, I got a clue where I was. And Sarah got out her diary and she flipped through, looked at the date, and she said, yeah, you was with me.
I can speak to Sarah.
Yeah. See if she's still going to make that.
I think she was trying to be helpful for him. And I guess, you know, if you think about it, you don't want to think your child is responsible for doing such a grave crime. And so I would imagine she was desperate.
I haven't spoken to them for ages. I haven't fallen out of them, but I ain't spoken to them. So whether she's still going to say that or not, but I can't remember it. I was off my head all the time. I was drunk. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know where I was 2.5 years ago. I struggled where I was last week.
It was quite clear in that recording that he was trying to manufacture an alibi at that time that would take him out of the area at the material time when Georgina was murdered.
As well as Hamlin's mobile phone pinging on a nearby mast, linking him to the scene, new evidence comes to light, which police believe is even more conclusive.
The other bit was partial DNA that was found on the rolling pin, and also, I believe, on a small part of her clothing. That was a partial match to this particular subject, putting the two together, and he came right to the top.
Eventually, the scientists were able to show some components of that mixed profile were 2,600 times more likely to be attributable to Matthew Hamlin. We were fairly confident that Hamlin was responsible.
After a manhunt that lasted years, it seems police have finally found their man. And Matthew Hamlin is charged with Georgina's murder. Matthew pleads not guilty, and 10 months later, the trial begins at Winchester Crown Court.
You're nervous, you're excited, you've got the victim's family up in the gallery, your QC opens up the case, you hear what's being said, and you sit back and think, that sounds pretty good. You know, if I'm on the jury, I'd be thinking, guilty.
The prosecution lay out a mountain of evidence against Matthew Hamlin. And after a 3-month trial, the jury returns with its verdict.
When the call came through, I remember the news desk saying to me, "It's not guilty." At that moment, it was one of those moments in the newsroom where you get that stunned silence.
They don't happen that often. So when they do, and when it's such an important case like that, you can't really describe it. It's just a punch in the guts, you know. Yes, professionally, you're disappointed for yourself, you know, and your team, but it's the family, you know, you really feel for. And, you know, you do question, could we have done more, you know? Did we have the wrong person, you know? Is there somebody out there that's done this that we haven't caught?
I do think about the community. The community had lived with this for 4 years. They believed that the monster amongst them had been caught and was now going to get his just desserts. And now it wasn't. And according to the court, he's not the monster at all. Well, who is the monster?
Despite a 2.5-year manhunt and becoming Hampshire Constabulary's most expansive investigation, Matthew Hamlin has been acquitted of Georgina Edmonds' murder, leaving her family, the community and the police feeling devastated and in shock.
Well, we're back now to square one. The mystery continues. The courts have cleared him. So who is it? Is it my neighbour? Is it my friend? Is it someone in my family? Is it someone I work with?
You always have to be open-minded, and you have to accept that actually Hamlin didn't do it and there is someone else out there.
With the case unsolved, the possibility of the killer getting away with murder looms over police.
Are the police looking for anyone else? Is the case closed? And the police were quite adamant that the case remained open, that they were carrying on their investigations.
So obviously we have a debrief. We'll meet with counsel as well. We'll speak with the family. We will conduct a review of that investigation to see if there were anything we missed, anything we could have done, mainly because so lessons can be learned, because once somebody's been acquitted, that's it.
Detectives go back to the drawing board and relook at all the evidence they have collated over the years and examine what went wrong.
We've spent millions of pounds on this investigation, the most expensive investigations that Hampshire police have ever run, and the forensic budget was through the roof.
Beforehand, they had looked for his DNA on the marble rolling pin, but graphically there was so much of Georgina Edmonds' blood on that blurred everything, and they got just a partial sample. And then from another small part of her clothing, where again it was a partial sample. I mean, you're asking a jury to put someone away for life on the grounds of circumstantial evidence and also partial DNA. It's too cloudy, and I think juries can then look at it and say, can I actually send a man away for life on evidence here which is not the strongest?
Police spend years looking for new techniques to forensically identify a killer. And they eventually come across a recent form of DNA testing called YSTR. which extracts the male DNA profile from a full DNA profile.
It's a simple process, and it's almost sellotape on clothing and points of the body to remove skin cells. So it's fairly early on in the exhibits that we've taken of the left sleeve of Georgina's blouse, which would have had skin cells on there. And so the decision was taken to look at those skin cells and examine them, because we hadn't done so far. We'd done the waistband, but not the sleeve. And then obviously it went for analysis, number crunching, etc. And it came back with a full male profile.
On Thursday, 30th of October 2014, police make an announcement. They have arrested and charged a suspect for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. As a new trial looms, people want to know, who is in the frame? None other than Matthew Hamlin.
This is incredible. They're going to put him back on trial. It wouldn't have been allowed because double jeopardy meant you could not be tried for the same crime in this country that had only been changed a few years prior to that, which enabled this to actually happen.
Despite the double jeopardy rules changing in 2003 and a new stack of DNA evidence, how did detectives manage to get Hamlin's charge over the line?
It's not an easy thing to do for obvious reasons. The defence argued that it's not new evidence, you had it all along, you just chose not to examine it and find it. But actually, it's not evidence until you've actually turned it into evidence. And that was the ruling of Sir Brian Levison, who heard that at the Court of Appeal, who then quashed the acquittal, and we were able to then go for a retrial.
January 2016, exactly 8 years after Georgina's murder, the second trial of Matthew Hamlin begins at Winchester Crown Court. The prosecution lay out all their evidence once again, including their new secret weapon, the YSTR DNA technique.
We were hoping for a better outcome this time.
It's 1 in 26 million, that DNA, that it's not him.
And when you describe that, you know, there's 26 million to 1 is this person, I think it was a fairly easy decision for the jury to make. Layered on top of that was obviously he was a local person, violent background, and obviously the phone was bouncing off the mast at the time.
Despite presenting their new evidence in court, there are many in the community who are unconvinced that Matthew Hamlin is the killer. At the time of the second trial, Matthew is a changed man, leaving behind his days of drug-taking, working full-time as an electrician and raising his family. And after a grueling 6-week trial, the jury retires to consider the verdict.
When you do get to court and the prosecution and the defence have had their say and the judge has summed up, you still get a bit nervous, even though you just know in your heart of hearts that it's a really, really strong case.
So we can't speculate, we can't talk to people about, well, you know, what do you think this time? Do you think he's going to get off a second time?
On the 23rd of February 2016, the jury return with a verdict.
8 years after Georgina Edmonds, aged 77 years, was found dead at her home in Banbridge, Matthew Hamlin has today been found guilty of her brutal murder.
It was just a sense of relief and just great work, and so many people, bear in mind this investigation had gone on for years really, and so many people have got involved in that investigation. But it was just such a nice feeling.
Throughout this entire investigation, we have been absolutely determined to prove beyond reasonable doubt who committed this horrific crime. After the discovery of new evidence and presenting it to the Court of Appeal, we were able to try Matthew Hamlin again for the murder of Georgina Edmonds. The whole prosecution team were determined to find justice for Georgina, and today that has been achieved.
Being stood there, listening to Harry address the media and just say some really nice words about me and my colleagues and Hampshire Police and all the work that we've done to get justice for for the family. So yeah, just a great feeling.
The entire team of police officers, police staff, prosecution barristers, forensic scientists and colleagues from the Crown Prosecution Service have been absolutely dedicated to putting together the best possible case that could be put before the court and the jury. Every moment has been worth it to see justice finally served and the killer of Georgina Edmonds behind bars. Thank you.
With Matthew Hamlin finally behind bars, the question that still puzzles the community is why would he want to end the life of Georgina Edmonds so brutally, torturing her before battering her to death?
Who can say, and it's difficult for me to speculate. Well, we know now from the court case, although he's never admitted it, that he was short of money, that he had walked along the riverbank and he had found his way in the cottage, whether that was just by pure chance, whether he had seen her walking her dogs and had known that she was gone there and she was a vulnerable old lady. Sadly, whether he would have known or not, that the door was left open when he went in. He had tortured her to reveal the number for her debit card by stabbing her something like 27 times and then just leave her there, tie her up or something like that. But then it all got, who knows what it is. But I think what we can tell is that he is a pretty evil, nasty guy who will spend 30 years in prison.
And after 8 long years of fear, can normal life return for the local community?
It's so close to reality for us here that, you know, it's traumatic for all of us in the village.
They're vulnerable too. They're so trusting. I know we all felt very, very sorry for her. Yeah, very sorry.
It's Ethan Hunt's toughest choice yet. What's more important, his job or those he cares about most? With out-of-this-world stunts, the BAFTA-nominated Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning is available now on Sky Cinema.
Chơi thì cứ thế mà mở kịch loa như
con người với con vật khác nhau ở chỗ đấy.
Của mình đẳng
tổng thống Rốt không phụ lại được con model cao sơn. Khổ tâm tôi thật. Chỉ việc con gặp người sức khỏe. Sao wifi lạc dữ vậy? Con lấy em làm thứ mấy? Đây hả? Gửi cho con đi. Nghỉ chủ nhật thôi.